The moment Lorenzo Key stepped into that dive bar, he knew someone was about to make a fatal mistake. He just didn't expect it to be the broken woman with tears streaming down her face, reaching for a drink that would seal her fate. What he saw in her eyes wasn't just pain, it was the kind of desperation that gets people killed in his world. And when he discovered her ex-fiancé had used her name to betray the wrong people, Lorenzo had a choice: walk away and let her die, or pull her into the darkness he'd spent a lifetime building. If you want to see how far this story of danger and redemption goes, stay until the end, hit that like button, and drop a comment with your city so I can see where my stories are reaching you. The rain hammered against the cracked window of Murphy's bar like it was trying to break through, each drop a tiny fist demanding entry into the sanctuary of the broken and desperate. It was the kind of Manhattan dive where dreams came to drown, a place where the liquor was cheap, the lights were dim, and nobody asked questions they didn't want answered. Ava Mitchell sat at the far end of the bar, her reflection fractured in the mirror behind the bottles. She barely recognized herself. The woman staring back had hollow eyes, smudged mascara, and the kind of exhaustion that came from having the foundation of your entire life ripped out from under you in a single, devastating afternoon. 3 days ago, she'd had a fiancé, a job, an apartment in the West Village that she'd spent 2 years saving for, a future that looked bright enough to justify all the sacrifices she'd made to escape the small Pennsylvania town where she'd grown up poor and angry. Now she had nothing. Derek had taken it all. Her savings, cleaned out of their joint account before he disappeared. Her job, she'd been fired when the company discovered financial irregularities tied to her employee ID, transactions she'd never authorized, access codes she'd never used. Her apartment, the lease had been in his name, a practical decision that now felt like the setup it probably always was. "Another one, sweetheart." The bartender's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. He was old enough to have seen 1,000 women exactly like her, young enough to still pretend he cared. Ava looked down at her empty glass. She'd lost count after 4. Or was it 5? The vodka had stopped burning an hour ago, sliding down smooth and cold, numbing everything it touched. "Yeah." Her voice came out rough, damaged. "Make it a double." The bartender hesitated, his eyes flicking to the man who'd just walked in. Ava didn't notice. She was too busy studying the engagement ring still on her finger, a half-carat princess cut that had seemed so beautiful 2 months ago when Derek proposed on the Brooklyn Bridge. Now it felt like a shackle, a monument to her own stupidity. "I think you've had enough." The voice came from beside her, smooth and cold as winter steel. Ava's head snapped up. The man who'd materialized on the bar stool next to her wasn't the type who belonged in Murphy's. Everything about him screamed money and power, from the perfectly tailored black suit that probably cost more than her former monthly rent, to the watch on his wrist that caught the dim light with the quiet flash of real wealth. But it was his face that made her breath catch. Sharp cheekbones, dark eyes that seemed to see through skin and bone straight into the mess of her soul, and a mouth set in a line that suggested he'd never smiled at anything that wasn't covered in blood. "I don't remember asking for your opinion," Ava said, turning back to her drink. "You didn't." He gestured to the bartender, who immediately stopped pouring and stepped back like he'd been given a direct order. "But I'm giving it to you anyway." Ava felt anger flare through the numb haze of alcohol, hot and bright and desperately welcome. It was the first thing she'd felt besides crushing despair in 3 days. "Who the hell do you think you are?" "Someone who's seen what happens to women like you in places like this when they've had too much to drink and not enough sense." His accent was American, but there was something else underneath it, something that suggested he'd learned English somewhere far from these streets. "Women like me?" Ava's voice rose. "You don't know anything about me. I know you're about 30 seconds from making a mistake you can't take back." His eyes flicked to the door where 2 men had just entered. They were scanning the bar with the kind of systematic attention that had nothing to do with looking for a good time. Ava followed his gaze. There was something wrong about the way they moved, too coordinated, too purposeful. One of them pulled out his phone, and she saw the screen light up his face with its pale glow. "Those men are looking for someone," the stranger said quietly. "And I suspect they're looking for you." "Look, that's crazy." But even as Ava said it, ice was flooding through her veins, cutting through the alcohol. One of the men was showing his phone to the bartender, who was nodding and pointing in her direction. Is your name Ava Mitchell? She stared at him. How do you... Yes or no? Yes, but... He moved with a speed that stole her breath. One moment he was sitting beside her. The next his hand was on her wrist, pulling her off the bar stool with irresistible force. The engagement ring caught on the bar's edge, and she felt it slide off her finger, heard the tiny ping as it hit the floor. Hey! Ava tried to pull away, but his grip was iron-wrapped in skin. Leave it. We need to go. Now. The two men had spotted her. They were moving through the bar, pushing past other patrons with the kind of casual violence that said they didn't care who saw them or what anyone thought about it. I'm not going anywhere with you. Miss Mitchell, you have two choices. His voice cut through her protest with surgical precision. You can come with me and live through the next 5 minutes, or you can stay here and find out what those men want with you. But I promise you, whatever they have planned ends with you regretting every decision that brought you to this bar tonight. Ava looked into his eyes. They were dark as midnight and absolutely serious. Why would you help me? You don't even know me. Something flickered across his face, too fast to read, too deep to understand. Let's just say I have a vested interest in keeping you alive. The men were 20 feet away now. 15. One of them reached inside his jacket, and Ava's survival instinct finally kicked through the alcohol and shock. Okay, let's go. He moved immediately, pulling her toward the back of the bar with the confidence of someone who'd mapped every exit before he walked through the door. The bartender watched them go with wide eyes, but said nothing as the stranger shouldered through the kitchen entrance, dragging Ava behind him. The kitchen was a disaster of grease and chaos. A line cook looked up from his station, mouth opening to protest. But one look at the stranger's face, and he went back to his work like they didn't exist. Behind them, Ava heard shouting. The men had reached the bar. They'd found her empty seat, her abandoned drink, the engagement ring glinting on the floor like a small accusation. Where are we going? Ava gasped as they burst through the back door into an alley that reeked of garbage and rain. Somewhere they can't follow. A car was waiting, a black SUV with tinted windows and an engine that purred like a sleeping panther. The back door opened before they reached it, and Ava found herself being pushed inside with a hand on her head like she'd seen in cop shows. She landed on leather seats that probably cost more than her entire wardrobe had. The stranger slid in beside her, and the door closed with the solid thunk of German engineering and bulletproof glass. Drive, he said to the man behind the wheel, and they were moving before Ava could catch her breath. She twisted in her seat, looking back at the alley. The two men had burst through the kitchen door, but they were already too late. The SUV turned onto the street, merging into traffic with the smooth efficiency of a shark into water. Who were those people? Ava demanded. Her heart was hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. Why were they looking for me? That's an excellent question. The stranger settled back into his seat, perfectly calm despite having just executed what looked like a professional extraction. One I suspect you're about to help me answer. Ava pressed herself against the opposite door, suddenly aware that she'd just let a complete stranger pull her into a vehicle and drive away with her. All the true crime podcasts she'd ever listened to were screaming warnings in her head. Let me out. We're doing 70 on the FDR drive. I'd advise against it. I mean, stop the car and let me out. No. The simple refusal hit her like a slap. You can't just kidnap me. I didn't kidnap you. You agreed to come with me. Remember? About 90 seconds ago, when those men were 10 feet away and reaching for their weapons? Ava's mouth went dry. Weapons? Did you think they wanted to have a friendly conversation? He turned to face her fully, and she saw his eyes were even darker than she'd thought. Black coffee and old secrets. Miss Mitchell, someone wants you dead or disappeared. Those men in the bar were professionals. If I hadn't been there, you'd be in the back of a very different vehicle right now, heading somewhere you would never come back from. That's insane. I'm nobody. I was a junior accountant at a mid-level firm. I don't have enemies who send professionals after me. Perhaps not. But someone in your life does. Derek? The name hit her like a physical blow. Ava's hands started shaking. What did he do? I was hoping you could tell me. The stranger pulled out his phone, tapped the screen a few times, then turned it toward her. Do you recognize this? The document on the screen was a contract, dense with legal language and figures that made her head spin. But she recognized the signature at the bottom. Her signature. Except she'd never seen this document before in her life. I didn't sign this. But that's your name, your signature, your employee identification number from Morrison and Associates. Ava felt the world tilting. Morrison and Associates was the firm that had fired her 3 days ago. They'd shown her transactions she'd supposedly authorized, accounts she'd supposedly accessed, all bearing her digital signature and credentials. Someone forged it, she whispered. Derek. He had access to my computer, my passwords. I thought we were engaged. I trusted him. Derek Hayes, former financial analyst at Whitmore Capital, fired 6 months ago for suspicious trading activity but never prosecuted due to lack of evidence. The stranger recited the information like he was reading from a file. Currently wanted by 3 different organizations, 2 of which are willing to pay substantial sums for information about his whereabouts. And all of them believe you know where he is. I don't. He disappeared 3 days ago, took everything and vanished. Before or after he used your identity to guarantee a rather large loan from some very unforgiving people. The SUV took a turn, and Ava grabbed the door handle to steady herself. Outside the tinted windows, Manhattan flashed by in streaks of light and shadow. They were heading north, away from the dive bars and toward neighborhoods where the buildings got taller and the people got richer. What loan? How much? $3 million. Ava's vision grayed at the edges. $3 million. That's impossible. No one would loan someone like me that kind of money. They would if they thought you were backed by someone with access to Morrison and Associates client accounts. Someone who could move money in ways that wouldn't be immediately noticed. Someone who had intimate knowledge of which clients were vulnerable to certain types of pressure. But I'm not. I was a junior accountant. I processed expense reports and reconciled petty cash. I didn't have access to anything important. No. But Derek convinced some dangerous people that you did. And when he disappeared with their money, they naturally assumed you were his partner, not his victim. Ava's breath came in short, sharp gasps. This couldn't be happening. This was the kind of thing that happened in movies and thriller novels, not to broke 28-year-old women from nowhere, Pennsylvania, who'd only ever wanted a normal life. I need to go to the police. The stranger's laugh was soft and utterly without humor. And tell them what? That you're wanted by multiple criminal organizations for a debt you didn't incur? That your signature is on documents you didn't sign but can't prove or forged? The police can't protect you from these people, Miss Mitchell. They can barely protect themselves. Then what am I supposed to do? That depends on whether you want to survive the next 48 hours. The SUV pulled up to a building that looked like it cost more per square foot than entire towns in Pennsylvania. Doormen in uniform stood at attention. The lobby visible through the glass was all marble and modern art. Where are we? Somewhere safe, temporarily. The stranger opened his door, then turned back to her. You can come inside and we can discuss how to keep you alive. Or you can get out here, take your chances on the street, and see how long it takes those men to find you again. Your choice. Ava looked out at the rainy street, then back at the stranger with his expensive suit and eyes like dark water. Every instinct screamed that she shouldn't trust him, but every memory of those men in the bar, their systematic search, the way they'd moved with practiced violence, screamed louder. Who are you? She asked. Really? He smiled then, and it was the most dangerous thing she'd ever seen. My name is Lorenzo Key, and you, Miss Mitchell, have stumbled into something far more complicated than a cheating fiancé and stolen savings. The rain hammered harder against the SUV's roof. Somewhere in the city, men were looking for her. Men who thought she owed them $3 million. Men who wouldn't believe her protests of innocence. Ava took a deep breath and opened her door. Lorenzo's penthouse was the kind of space featured in architectural magazines and celebrity home tours. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of Manhattan that made the city look like a glittering toy spread out for someone's amusement. The furniture was minimal and expensive, each piece selected with the kind of attention usually reserved for museum acquisitions. But it was the security that caught Ava's attention. Cameras visible in every corner. A panel by the door that looked like it controlled everything from climate to lockdown protocols. And the way Lorenzo moved through the space, checking systems with the automatic efficiency of someone who never fully relaxed, never fully trusted that the walls between him and danger were thick enough. Sit. He gestured to a leather couch that probably cost more than her old apartment's deposit. I'll make coffee. Something tells me you're going to need to be sober for this conversation. Ava sank into the couch, her legs suddenly unable to hold her up anymore. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving behind a shaky awareness of just how surreal this entire night had become. She watched Lorenzo move through the open kitchen with precise, economical movements. He filled an espresso machine that looked like it belonged in an Italian cafe, the kind of machine people saved for years to afford. Everything he did was controlled, measured, like he was conserving energy for some future violence. You said organizations are looking for Derek, Ava said, her voice steadier than she felt. What kind of organizations? Lorenzo's back was to her, but she saw his shoulders tense slightly. The kind that don't accept excuses for missing payments. The kind that view betrayal as a personal insult requiring permanent resolution. You mean criminals? I mean business people who operate outside the traditional legal framework. He turned, holding 2 small cups of espresso. Though yes, by most definitions, criminals. He handed her a cup and sat in the chair across from her, close enough to have a conversation, far enough to give her space. The espresso was perfect, rich and dark and strong enough to cut through the lingering vodka haze. How do you know all this? Ava asked. About Derek, about the loan, about those men. Because the people he borrowed from are people I know. Lorenzo's eyes met hers over the rim of his cup. People I do business with. People who came to me 2 days ago asking if I knew anything about a loan guarantee that had suddenly gone very wrong. The implication settled over Ava like ice water. You're one of them, one of these criminals. I prefer to think of myself as someone who provides services that others need but can't acquire through legal channels. That's just a fancy way of saying criminal. If it makes you feel better to think in such simple terms, yes, I'm a criminal. He set down his cup with deliberate care. I'm also the only thing standing between you and a very unpleasant end to this situation. Ava wanted to argue, to stand up and walk out, to pretend this was all a nightmare she could wake up from. But the memory of those men in the bar, the cold certainty in Lorenzo's voice, kept her pinned to the expensive leather. Why are you helping me? If you're one of them, why aren't you? She couldn't finish the sentence. Torturing you for information about Derek's location? Holding you for ransom until the debt is paid? Lorenzo's voice was clinical, like they were discussing weather patterns instead of her potential murder. Several reasons. First, I don't believe you know where Derek is. Your reactions are too genuine, your fear too real. You're a victim, not a co-conspirator. And second, the people who hired those men to find you are rivals of mine, competitors in a market where competition is solved with bullets rather than price wars. If they're so eager to find you, I have a vested interest in keeping you away from them. So I'm what? Bait? Leverage? Information. Lorenzo leaned forward, his dark eyes intense. Derek didn't just steal money, Miss Mitchell. He stole something far more valuable, reputation. The people he borrowed from guaranteed that loan to other parties, creating a chain of obligation and promise that extends through several organizations. When he vanished, he didn't just create a financial loss. He created a credibility crisis that's threatening to destabilize relationships built over decades. Ava's head was spinning. I don't understand how this involves me. Derek used you as collateral. He told them you had access to Morrison and Associates systems, that you could move money in ways that would cover the loan. He showed them documents with your signature, credentials with your name. He built an entire fiction where you were his partner, his accomplice, his guarantee. But I wasn't. I know that. You know that. But the people holding the debt don't care about the truth. They care about their money and their reputation. And right now you're the only lead they have. Ava set down her espresso cup before her shaking hands could drop it. So what happens now? Do I just hide here forever? Wait for them to forget about me? They won't forget. Men like that don't forgive debts or forget faces. Lorenzo stood and walked to the windows, looking out over the city like a king surveying his kingdom. But there might be another way. What way? Derek is smart, but not smart enough. He left trails, digital breadcrumbs, that someone with the right resources could follow. If we can find him before the others do, if we can recover the money, or at least prove you were innocent, Then they might leave me alone. They might, Lorenzo turned back to her. Or they might decide to make an example of you anyway, to show what happens when someone gets tangled up in their business, willing or not. That's not exactly reassuring. I'm not here to reassure you, Miss Mitchell. I'm here to keep you alive long enough to find Derek and resolve this situation. After that, he shrugged, after that you'll be someone else's problem. Ava stood on legs that felt like water. She walked to the window and looked out at Manhattan spread below them. Somewhere in that maze of steel and light, Derek was hiding. Somewhere in those streets, men were hunting her. And here she stood in the penthouse of a self-confessed criminal, her life depending on a man she'd met less than an hour ago. I don't have a choice, do I? Everyone has choices, but some choices are between bad and worse. She turned to face him. If I agree to this, if I help you find Derek, what do you get out of it? Lorenzo smiled that dangerous smile again. I get to solve a problem for people who owe me favors. I get to inconvenience my rivals. And I get the satisfaction of watching someone who thought they could cheat the system learn that there are prices you can't pay your way out of. And what do I get? Your life. Isn't that enough? It should have been. But standing there, looking at Lorenzo Key with his perfect suit and eyes that had seen things she couldn't imagine, Ava felt something shift inside her. The broken woman who'd been drowning her sorrows in Murphy's bar was gone. In her place was someone harder, sharper, more desperate. Someone who was tired of being a victim. Okay, she said. I'll help you find Derek, but I want something in return. Lorenzo's eyebrow rose. You're not exactly in a position to negotiate. Aren't I? You said yourself I'm the only lead. If I don't cooperate, if I just disappear or go to the police, or I could make you cooperate. You could try. But I've got nothing left to lose, Mr. Key. Derek took everything. These people you're so worried about are already hunting me. What's the worst you could do that isn't already coming for me? For a long moment, Lorenzo just looked at her. Then, slowly, he started to laugh. It was a real laugh this time, not the cold mockery from earlier. It transformed his face, made him look younger, almost human. You have spine. I didn't expect that. I've been broke, betrayed, and hunted all in the same week. Spine is all I have left. Ava crossed her arms. So here's my offer. I help you find Derek. I tell you everything I know about him, his habits, his contacts, whatever might help track him down. And in return, you don't just keep me alive. You teach me. Teach you what? How to survive in your world. How to see threats coming. How to make sure that no one ever uses me like this again. Lorenzo's expression shifted, became unreadable. You're asking me to turn you into something you're not. I'm asking you to turn me into something I should have been all along. Someone who doesn't get blindsided. Someone who doesn't trust the wrong people. Someone who can protect herself. That kind of knowledge has a price, Miss Mitchell. Everything has a price. I've just learned that lesson the hard way. Ava met his dark eyes without flinching. So what do you say? Do we have a deal? The rain had stopped. Outside the windows, Manhattan glittered like a promise and a threat all at once. Lorenzo studied her for what felt like an eternity, his expression calculating, weighing, deciding. Finally, he extended his hand. We have a deal. But understand this, Miss Mitchell. The world you're asking to learn about doesn't forgive mistakes. It doesn't offer second chances. Once you step into it, there's no going back to your old life. Ava took his hand. His grip was warm, strong, and absolutely steady. My old life is gone. I'm not trying to get it back. She squeezed his hand once firmly. I'm trying to build something new. Then let's begin. Lorenzo released her hand and walked to a desk in the corner of the room. He pulled out a laptop, opened it, and gestured for her to join him. Tell me everything you know about Derek Hayes. Where he liked to go, who he talked to, what he was interested in. Every detail, no matter how small. Ava pulled up a chair beside him. The leather was soft, expensive, nothing like the cheap furniture from her old life. She took a deep breath and began to talk. She told him about Derek's love of underground poker games in Brooklyn, the ones he'd claimed were just for fun, about the apartment he'd kept before they'd moved in together, the one in Queens he'd said he was selling but had visited every few weeks without explanation, about the phone calls he'd take in the other room, the ones he'd said were work, but that made his voice go cold, and flat. Lorenzo typed as she talked, his fingers flying over the keyboard with the same precision he brought to everything else. Names, places, dates, all of it going into whatever system he used to track people who didn't want to be found. "This apartment in Queens," Lorenzo said. "Do you remember the address?" Ava closed her eyes, picturing the building. "Somewhere in Astoria, near the train station, a brick building with a green awning. I only went there once, but—" She sat up straight. "There was a bodega on the corner, La Estrella. Derek used to buy lottery tickets there every week. Said it was good luck." "Good luck." Lorenzo's smile was thin. "Let's see how lucky he's feeling now." He pulled up a map, started cross-referencing locations with property records, financial transactions, surveillance footage from traffic cameras. Ava watched him work with a kind of horrified fascination. This was what real power looked like. Not money in a bank account or a job title on a business card, but the ability to pull strings invisible to normal people, to see patterns in chaos, to track someone through the digital breadcrumbs they didn't even know they were leaving. "There," Lorenzo said, pointing to a marker on the map. "An apartment registered under a shell corporation that Derek set up 3 years ago. It's been paying utilities, but the bank account funding it ran dry 2 weeks ago. If he's running, he might go there to grab cash or documents before disappearing completely." "You think he's still in the city?" "I think he's stupid enough to believe he can hide in plain sight. And I think he's arrogant enough to go back to a safe house he thinks no one knows about." Lorenzo checked his watch. It was nearly 3 in the morning. "We'll move at dawn. In the meantime, you should sleep." "I can't possibly sleep." "You can, and you will. Because tomorrow we're going into uncertain territory, and I need you sharp, not stumbling from exhaustion." He stood and led her to a bedroom that was somehow even more luxurious than the living room. "There are clothes in the closet that should fit you. Everything you need is in the bathroom. Get some rest, Miss Mitchell. Tomorrow, your education begins." Ava stood in the doorway, suddenly aware of how surreal this entire night had been. "Why are you really doing this? And don't tell me it's just about inconveniencing your rivals." Lorenzo paused, his hand on the doorframe. For just a moment, something flickered across his face, something that might have been recognition or regret, or just the shadow of old wounds that never quite healed. Because everyone deserves at least one person who stands between them and the dark. Even broken accountants from Pennsylvania who trust the wrong men. He turned to leave, then stopped. "And because I once knew someone who needed help and didn't get it, I won't make that mistake twice." Before Ava could ask what he meant, he was gone, the door closing behind him with a soft click. She stood alone in the bedroom, surrounded by expensive furniture and designer clothes, a prisoner of protection in a penthouse high above a city that wanted her dead. Outside the window, Manhattan was beginning to wake up, early morning light touching the tops of buildings like a benediction. Ava pulled out her phone, the one thing of her own she still had. The screen was cracked from when she'd thrown it against the wall after discovering Derek's betrayal. But it still worked. No messages, no calls, no one looking for her. She'd never felt more alone, but she'd also never felt more determined. Tomorrow, she would start hunting the man who destroyed her life. And she would do it alongside someone who knew exactly how to find people who didn't want to be found. Ava changed into the clothes Lorenzo had mentioned, expensive pajamas that fit perfectly, like he'd known her size without asking. She climbed into the bed, sank into sheets that felt like clouds, and stared at the ceiling. Sleep should have been impossible, but exhaustion was stronger than fear, and eventually her eyes closed. She dreamed of dive bars and dark alleys, of men with guns and a stranger in a black suit who'd pulled her out of the fire. And somewhere in the twisted logic of dreams, she was back in Pennsylvania, standing in her mother's kitchen while rain hammered against the windows. "You always did trust too easily," her mother said, though her mother had been dead for 5 years. "But maybe that's not weakness. Maybe that's just hope wearing the wrong disguise." When Ava woke, dawn was breaking over Manhattan, and Lorenzo was standing in her doorway with coffee and an expression that promised the education she'd asked for was about to begin. "Get dressed," he said. "We're going hunting." And somewhere across the city, Derek Hayes was about to learn that running from your mistakes only works if no one knows where you're going to land. The coffee Lorenzo brought was strong enough to strip paint, and Ava drank it gratefully, letting the bitter heat burn away the last remnants of vodka and exhaustion. She dressed quickly in the clothes laid out for her: dark jeans, a black sweater, boots that looked expensive but felt practical. Everything fit perfectly, which should have been comforting but instead felt vaguely unsettling, like Lorenzo had measured her with his eyes and known exactly what she needed. When she emerged from the bedroom, he was waiting by the door with two other men she hadn't seen before. Both wore suits similar to Lorenzo's. Both had the same watchful stillness that marked them as dangerous. "Miss Mitchell, this is Marcus and Jin. They'll be providing security while we investigate the Astoria location." Marcus was built like a tank. Broad shoulders, scarred knuckles, a face that looked like it had stopped caring about pain somewhere around the third broken nose. Jin was smaller, leaner, with eyes that never stopped moving, cataloging every entrance and exit, every potential threat. "Security against what?" Ava asked. "Against the possibility that Derek isn't the only person who knows about that apartment," Lorenzo said. "Against the chance that our rivals have had the same idea we have. Against anything that might go wrong in the next 3 hours." Optimistic. Realistic. Lorenzo handed her a phone, newer and more expensive than her cracked one. "This is yours now. It's encrypted and untraceable. My number is programmed in. If we get separated for any reason, you call me immediately. You don't try to handle things yourself. You don't try to run. You don't make decisions without consulting me first. Understood?" The command in his voice rubbed against something stubborn in Ava's chest. "I'm not your employee." "No, you're my responsibility, which means you follow my rules or you stay here locked in this penthouse while I handle Derek without you." His dark eyes were steady, uncompromising. "Your choice." Ava wanted to argue, wanted to push back against the easy authority in his tone, but she'd asked for this, asked to be taught how to survive in his world, and the first lesson, apparently, was learning when to swallow pride and accept that someone else knew better. "Understood," she said quietly. Something shifted in Lorenzo's expression, approval maybe, or just satisfaction that she was smart enough to recognize her own limitations. "Good. Let's move." The SUV from last night was waiting in the building's underground garage, along with a second vehicle, a nondescript sedan that looked like 10,000 others in the city. Marcus drove the SUV with Lorenzo and Ava in the back. Jin took the sedan, following at a careful distance. "Why two cars?" Ava asked as they merged into early morning traffic. "Redundancy. If something happens to one vehicle, we have backup. If we need to split up, we have options. If we're being followed, Jin can break off and lead them away while we complete the objective." Lorenzo checked his phone, reading through messages with quick, efficient movements. "In my world, Miss Mitchell, you always plan for things to go wrong." Sounds exhausting. "It's survival." They drove through Manhattan as the city woke up around them. Commuters flooding subway stations, coffee shops opening their doors, the whole massive machinery of urban life grinding into motion. Ava watched it all through the tinted windows and felt like she was seeing it from another planet. 24 hours ago, she'd been part of that world. One more anonymous person trying to make rent and pretend her life had meaning. Now she was in the back of an armored SUV with a criminal mastermind, hunting her ex-fiancé through the city's underbelly. The transformation felt both impossible and inevitable. They crossed into Queens just as the sun fully cleared the horizon. Astoria looked different in daylight, less gritty than she remembered, more like a neighborhood where real people lived real lives. The Bodega La Estrella was exactly where Ava remembered, its green awning faded but intact. "That's it," she said, pointing to a brick building 3 doors down. "Third floor, corner apartment." Lorenzo studied the building through the window. "Marcus, circle the block. I want to see all the exits." They drove slowly past, and Ava saw what Lorenzo was seeing: the fire escape on the east side, the alley access to the rear, the bodega next door that probably had a back entrance connecting to the building's basement, multiple ways in, multiple ways out. It was the kind of place someone chose when they wanted options. "There," Jin's voice crackled through a radio on the dashboard. Silver Honda, 2 occupants, parked across the street, with line of sight to the entrance. Ava followed Lorenzo's gaze and spotted the car. 2 men sat inside, trying to look casual, but failing. They had the same systematic awareness as the men from Murphy's bar, professionals doing surveillance. "Our rivals beat us here," Lorenzo said quietly. His voice was calm, but Ava saw his jaw tighten. They're watching the building, waiting to see if Derek shows up. So what do? We adapt. Lorenzo pulled out his phone and made a call. He spoke in rapid Mandarin. At least Ava thought it was Mandarin, though the dialect was too fast for her limited knowledge to catch more than a few words. When he hung up, his expression was calculating. We have approximately 10 minutes before additional support arrives for them. That's our window. Window to do what? To get inside that apartment before they realize we're here. Lorenzo turned to Marcus. Drop us at the bodega. Make it look natural. We're just getting coffee. Jin, keep eyes on that Honda. If they move, I want to know immediately. Copy, Jin's voice came back. The SUV pulled to a stop in front of La Estrella. Lorenzo opened the door and helped Ava out like they were a couple on a casual morning errand. His hand on her elbow was firm, guiding, keeping her close. Smile, he said softly. We're just two people grabbing breakfast. Ava forced her lips into something approximating a smile as they walked into the bodega. The interior smelled like coffee and fresh bread and the particular mix of spices that marked every neighborhood corner store in New York. An older man behind the counter looked up and smiled. Lorenzo, long time, my friend. Too long, Carlos. Lorenzo's entire demeanor changed, became warmer, more open, like he'd slipped into a different skin. Is Rosa in the back? Always. You want the usual? 2 coffees, and tell Rosa I need to use the family entrance. Something passed between the two men, an understanding built on history Ava couldn't see. Carlos nodded and disappeared through a doorway behind the counter. Family entrance? Ava whispered. Every building in this neighborhood was constructed during Prohibition. They all have connections between businesses and residences, ways to move product without being seen from the street. Lorenzo guided her toward the back of the bodega, past shelves of plantains and rice, canned goods, and cleaning supplies. Carlos and I have an arrangement. I helped his daughter when she had trouble with an abusive boyfriend. Now he helps me when I need to move unseen. A woman emerged from the back. Rosa, presumably, with eyes that had seen too much and a smile that suggested she'd survived it all anyway. She looked at Lorenzo, then at Ava, and something knowing crossed her face. She's too pretty for you, Rosa said. She's not with me like that. Business. Everything is business with you. But Rosa was already unlocking a door Ava hadn't noticed, hidden behind a rack of cleaning supplies. 3rd floor, apartment C, right? You know Derek? I know everyone in this building. That one's trouble. Came and went at odd hours, always looking over his shoulder. Rosa's expression hardened. He owes money? Among other things. Good. I never liked him. Too smooth. Men who smile that much are usually hiding something ugly underneath. She pushed the door open, revealing a narrow staircase that smelled like old wood and older secrets. Be quick. The family that lives on the 2nd floor gets up early. Lorenzo pressed cash into Rosa's hand, more than was necessary. Ava could tell by the way the older woman's eyes widened. For your discretion. You always pay too much. And you always earn it. They climbed the stairs in silence, Lorenzo leading, his movements careful and quiet. Ava tried to match his steps, wincing every time the old wood creaked under her weight. The staircase opened onto each floor through doors that looked like they belonged to maintenance closets, camouflage for the building's hidden arteries. 3rd floor. Lorenzo paused at the door, listening. Ava held her breath, suddenly aware of her heartbeat hammering in her ears. From somewhere below, she heard the sound of a television, a child laughing, the normal sounds of people living their lives with no idea that 2 strangers were creeping through their building's secret passages. Lorenzo tried the handle. Locked. He pulled out a small leather case from his jacket and selected 2 thin metal tools that looked like they belonged in a dentist's office. 30 seconds later, the lock clicked open. Where did you learn to do that? Ava whispered. Everywhere that mattered. Lorenzo eased the door open an inch, checking the hallway. Empty. Apartment C is 2 doors down. Stay behind me, stay quiet, and if I tell you to run, you run. No questions, no hesitation. Where would I run to? Back down these stairs, through the bodega, into the SUV. Marcus will get you out. What about you? Lorenzo's smile was quick and sharp. I've been getting myself out of bad situations since before you were born. I'll be fine. They moved down the hallway like ghosts. The carpet was worn thin in places, exposing the floor underneath. Someone was cooking breakfast in apartment A. Ava smelled bacon and heard the sizzle of a pan. Normal life, continuing on, completely unaware of the danger walking past their door. Apartment C looked exactly like the others. A plain wooden door with a peephole and a knocker shaped like a lion's head. But Ava felt her stomach tighten as Lorenzo examined the lock, the door frame, the space underneath where light should show if anyone was inside. Empty, he said quietly. He pulled out his lockpicks again, worked faster this time. The door swung open onto darkness. Lorenzo drew a gun from inside his jacket, a sleek black weapon that appeared in his hand like it had materialized from nothing. Ava's breath caught. Seeing it on television was one thing. Seeing it real, deadly, inches away, was something else entirely. "Stay close," Lorenzo said, and stepped inside. The apartment was small, a studio with a kitchenette, a bathroom, and enough space for a bed and a desk. But it had been ransacked. Drawers hung open, their contents spilled across the floor. The mattress had been flipped and cut open, stuffing pulled out in chunks. Papers were scattered everywhere, furniture overturned. "Someone got here first," Ava said. "Recently." Lorenzo knelt and touched a coffee cup on the counter. "Still warm. Whoever did this left within the last hour." Ava felt ice slide down her spine. "The men in the Honda?" "Possibly, or Derek himself grabbing what he needed before running." Lorenzo moved through the apartment systematically, checking closets, examining papers, his gun never wavering from ready position. "Look for anything that might tell us where he'd go next. Bank statements, plane tickets, addresses, phone numbers, anything." Ava picked her way through the chaos, trying not to think about the violence implied by the slashed mattress and overturned furniture. She found Derek's clothes in the closet, expensive shirts and designer jeans that he'd bought with her money, probably. The sight of them made anger flare hot in her chest. In the bathroom, she found his cologne. The scent hit her like a fist. Familiar, intimate, attached to 1,000 memories she'd thought were real. She'd loved the way he smelled, had pressed her face to his neck and breathed him in like he was oxygen. "Find something?" Lorenzo appeared in the doorway. Ava set down the cologne bottle with shaking hands. "Just ghosts." Lorenzo's expression softened fractionally. "The worst wounds are the ones that don't show, but you can't let them slow you down. Not now." "How do you do it? How do you just turn off the feelings and focus?" "I don't turn them off. I use them. Anger is fuel. Pain is motivation. Every emotion you're feeling right now can make you sharper, faster, more determined, if you let it." He moved closer, his dark eyes serious. "Derek hurt you, used you, destroyed your life for his own gain. Remember that. Let it burn. And when we find him, let it drive you to make sure he never does this to anyone else." Ava met his gaze and felt something shift inside her, grief transmuting into something harder, colder. "Okay." They searched for another 10 minutes, but whoever had tossed the apartment had been thorough. If Derek had left anything useful, it was gone now. Lorenzo was photographing some papers when his phone buzzed. "Jin says the Honda is getting antsy. They're making calls, looking at the building. We need to leave. Now." They retraced their steps through the hallway, down the hidden stairs, back through the bodega where Carlos was serving early morning customers like nothing unusual was happening. Rosa caught Ava's eye as they passed and gave her a small nod. Solidarity between women who'd learned to recognize trouble in a man's smile. Outside, the morning had brightened into full day. The SUV was waiting, Marcus at the wheel with the engine running. Lorenzo guided Ava inside and they pulled away from the curb just as one of the men from the Honda stepped out and started walking toward the building. "Close," Marcus said. "Too close. They're more organized than I expected." Lorenzo pulled out his phone and started making calls again, switching between English and Mandarin with fluid ease. Ava listened, trying to pick up context from his tone. He was frustrated. She could hear it under the controlled calm. They'd come looking for answers and found only more questions. "Where to now?" Ava asked when he finally hung up. "Now we think like Derek. He's running, but he's not stupid. He knows staying in the city is dangerous, but leaving requires resources. Money, documents, connections." Lorenzo's eyes were distant, calculating. You said he liked underground poker games in Brooklyn. Where exactly? Ava tried to remember. Derek had been secretive about the location, always claiming it moved around. But she'd picked him up once when his car was in the shop. A warehouse in Red Hook, near the water. No sign outside, just a red door with a buzzer. Red Hook, she said. A warehouse near the shipping containers. I don't remember the exact address, but it was walking distance from the ferry terminal. Red Hook. Lorenzo's expression shifted. Recognition, maybe concern. That's Viktor Kozlov's territory. Who's Viktor Kozlov? Someone even I'm careful around. Russian, old school, runs half the illegal gambling in Brooklyn. Lorenzo leaned forward. Marcus, Red Hook, but we're not going in blind. I need to make some calls first. As they drove, Lorenzo explained. Viktor Kozlov was a remnant of the old Soviet crime networks. A man who'd built an empire on gambling, smuggling, and a reputation for violence that made even other criminals nervous. The poker games Derek attended weren't casual. They were high stakes, invitation only, the kind of place where fortunes changed hands and debts got settled in blood when cash wasn't enough. If Derek owed money to Kozlov, that would explain a lot, Lorenzo said. Victor doesn't forgive debts, doesn't negotiate. You pay or you disappear. So Derek borrowed $3 million to pay off a gambling debt? Or he lost money he'd already borrowed, then borrowed more trying to win it back. Gamblers always think the next hand will save them. Lorenzo's voice carried the weight of experience. Either way, if Victor's involved, this situation just became exponentially more dangerous. They pulled into a parking lot overlooking the water. Red Hook spread before them, industrial buildings and converted warehouses, artist lofts and shipping containers stacked like building blocks. The warehouse Ava remembered was visible from here, a squat brick structure with no windows and that distinctive red door. Lorenzo made another call, spoke in Russian this time, a language that sounded harsh and beautiful all at once. When he hung up, he looked at Ava seriously. I can get us a meeting with Victor, but you need to understand what that means. Victor doesn't meet with people unless there's a reason, and he doesn't forget faces. If we do this, you're stepping into his world, putting yourself on his radar. Once he knows who you are, you can't unknow him. Will it help us find Derek? If anyone knows where Derek is hiding, it's Victor. Gamblers always come back to the table, especially when they're desperate. Ava looked at the warehouse, then back at Lorenzo. Then let's do it. You're certain? Because there's no going back from this. She thought about the apartment in Astoria, ransacked and empty. Thought about the men hunting her through the city. Thought about Derek's cologne in the bathroom and the way her hands had shaken holding it. I'm certain. Lorenzo nodded slowly. Then we go in together. But you follow my lead. Victor respects strength, but he punishes stupidity. Speak only when spoken to. Answer questions honestly and don't show fear. Can you do that? I've been broke and scared my entire life. I know how to hide it. Good. Lorenzo checked his watch. Victor will see us at noon. That gives us 2 hours to prepare. They spent those 2 hours in a coffee shop 3 blocks from the warehouse. Lorenzo briefed Ava on Viktor Kozlov, his history, his reputation, his rules. How he'd survived 3 different mob wars by being smarter and more ruthless than everyone who tried to kill him. How he valued loyalty above everything else, and punished betrayal with a creativity that made people disappear and leave warnings in their absence. He sounds like a monster, Ava said. He's a businessman who operates in a world where contracts are enforced with violence instead of lawyers. The principles are the same, just the methods differ. Lorenzo stirred his coffee with deliberate motions. But yes, by most definitions, Victor is a monster. Just remember that everyone in this world is a monster to someone. The question is whether they're your monster or someone else's. What about you? Are you a monster? Lorenzo met her eyes over his coffee cup. What do you think? Ava considered the question. She thought about the way he'd pulled her out of Murphy's bar, the protection he'd offered, the careful concern under his controlled exterior. But she also thought about the gun that had appeared so easily in his hand, the way people deferred to him, the network of obligations and favors he moved through like a spider in its web. I think you're someone who's done monstrous things for reasons you believe justified them. I think you've hurt people and sleep fine at night. But I also think there's something in you that still recognizes when someone needs help, even if you pretend it's just strategy. Lorenzo's smile was small and sad. You see too much. Or maybe you're not as good at hiding as you think. At 11:45, they walked to the warehouse. The red door was exactly as Ava remembered, anonymous, forbidding, with a camera above it tracking their approach. Lorenzo pressed the buzzer and spoke into the intercom in Russian. The door opened. Inside was a world that smelled like cigar smoke and old money and the particular tension of men risking everything on the turn of a card. The main floor had been converted into a casino, poker tables, roulette wheels, a bar that served drinks in crystal glasses. Men in expensive suits played with chips that represented real fortunes, their faces carved from stone and careful control. But it was the man waiting by the bar who commanded attention. Viktor Kozlov was in his 60s, built like a bull that had never stopped fighting. His suit was tailored to hide muscle gone to weight, but his hands were scarred from violence that predated his wealth. His eyes were pale blue, the color of winter ice over deep water. Lorenzo Key. Victor's accent was thick, his English precise. It's been too long. Victor, thank you for seeing us on short notice. You said it was important. I trust you wouldn't waste my time. Victor's gaze shifted to Ava, and she felt it like a physical touch, assessing, measuring, cataloging everything about her in seconds. And this is? Ava Mitchell. She has a problem that intersects with your business. Ava Mitchell. Victor rolled her name around in his mouth like he was tasting it. Derek Hayes' woman. Ava's stomach dropped. I'm not his. You were engaged to him. You shared accounts, passwords, access. In my world, that makes you his woman, or it did, until he decided to run. You know where he is, Lorenzo said. It wasn't a question. I know where he was. Whether he's still there depends on how fast he runs. Victor gestured to a private room off the main floor. Come, we should speak privately. The private room was lined with soundproofing and expensive art. Originals, Ava thought, though she didn't recognize the artists. Victor poured vodka into 3 glasses, handed them out without asking if they wanted it. To business, he said, and downed his in one smooth motion. Ava followed suit. The vodka burned like liquid fire, but she kept her expression neutral. Beside her, Lorenzo drank without even blinking. Victor refilled the glasses. Derek Hayes came to me 6 months ago with a proposal. He had access, he claimed, to client accounts at a major financial firm. He could move money in ways that wouldn't be noticed for weeks. All he needed was seed capital to make the operation work. And you gave it to him, Lorenzo said. I lent it to him. $3 million at 15% interest due in 90 days. Victor's smile was cold. He had excellent collateral, or so I thought. He showed me documentation proving his fiancée had the access he needed. Signatures, credentials, authorization codes. Everything looked legitimate. It was forged, Ava said. I never signed anything. I never knew what he was planning. I believe you. If you were his partner, you'd be much harder to find. Victor studied her over his glass. But belief doesn't change the facts. Derek took my money, failed to deliver the returns he promised, and then vanished before the debt came due. Someone must answer for that. She's not responsible for his actions, Lorenzo said, his voice carrying an edge Ava had never heard before. Then who is? Derek is gone. The money is gone. My reputation suffers if I let this insult stand unanswered. Victor refilled his glass again. However, I'm a reasonable man. I understand the difference between a conspirator and a victim, so I propose a compromise. What kind of compromise? Find Derek, recover my money. Do this, and Miss Mitchell's debt is cleared. Her name is removed from my ledgers, her face forgotten by my associates. She walks away clean. And if we can't find him, Victor's smile didn't reach his eyes, then Miss Mitchell works off the debt through other means. I always have uses for intelligent people who can move through legitimate society. $3 million at standard rates, perhaps 5 years of service would satisfy the obligation. Ava felt her mouth go dry. 5 years as Viktor Kozlov's property. 5 years doing whatever he demanded, whenever he demanded it. 5 years of becoming exactly the kind of person she'd sworn never to be. That's not acceptable, Lorenzo said. Then find Derek. Victor leaned back in his chair. I'm giving you a gift, Lorenzo. Most people who cross me don't get options. But you and I have history. You've been useful to me in the past, so I'm extending courtesy. 2 weeks. Find Derek, recover the money, and we forget this unfortunate situation ever happened. And if someone else finds him first? Then you'd better be faster than they are. Victor pulled out his phone and showed them a photograph. Derek, looking thinner and more desperate than Ava remembered, walking into a building she didn't recognize. This was taken 3 days ago in Atlantic City. He's staying at a motel near the boardwalk, using a fake name, spending money he doesn't have at the tables. He's still gambling, Ava said, disbelief sharp in her voice. Addicts always return to their addiction. It's their nature. Victor forwarded the photo to Lorenzo's phone. The motel is called the Seaside Inn, room 217, but move quickly. Others are hunting him too, and they're not interested in bringing him back alive. Lorenzo stood, and Ava followed his lead. We'll find him. I know you will. You're many things, Lorenzo, but unreliable isn't one of them. Victor walked them to the door. And Miss Mitchell? A word of advice. The world you've stumbled into doesn't forgive innocence. Learn to be guilty or learn to be dead. There's no third option. Outside, the daylight felt harsh after the dim interior of the warehouse. Ava took deep breaths of cold air, trying to slow her racing heart. 5 years, she said. He threatened me with 5 years of slavery. He threatened you with leverage, Lorenzo corrected. Victor knew I wouldn't let that happen. He was establishing the stakes, making sure we understood how seriously he takes this debt. How seriously do you take it? Lorenzo looked at her, and she saw something hard and final in his expression. Seriously enough to make sure Derek never hurts you again. Come on, we have a 4-hour drive to Atlantic City, and I want to get there before anyone else does. They drove south as the day aged toward afternoon. Marcus stayed behind to coordinate surveillance on the warehouse and the Astoria apartment, just in case Derek doubled back. Jin followed in the sedan, maintaining the same careful distance as before. Lorenzo spent most of the drive on his phone, calling in favors and gathering information. Ava listened and learned. She learned that Lorenzo's network extended far beyond New York, that he had connections in every major city along the eastern seaboard. She learned that people spoke his name with respect and fear in equal measure. She learned that when he gave orders, they were followed without question. You built all this yourself? She asked during a rare quiet moment. I inherited some of it. My family had interests in certain industries. When they died, those interests became mine. What happened to them? Lorenzo's jaw tightened. They trusted the wrong person, made a deal with someone who smiled while sharpening the knife. By the time they realized their mistake, it was too late. I'm sorry. Don't be. It taught me the most important lesson I've ever learned. Trust is a luxury that costs lives. Better to work in certainty, even if that certainty is dark. They reached Atlantic City as the sun was setting, turning the ocean the color of blood and gold. The Seaside Inn was exactly the kind of place people went to disappear. Cheap, anonymous, with a desk clerk who didn't ask questions as long as the cash was good. Lorenzo parked 2 blocks away. He and Ava sat in the SUV, watching the motel's entrance through binoculars while Jin circled the building, checking exits and sight lines. Room 217 is on the 2nd floor, Oceanside, Lorenzo said. Lights are on. Someone's home. Ava's heart was hammering. After everything, the betrayal, the hunt, the desperate flight through her shattered life, Derek was right there, 200 feet away, close enough to touch, to confront, to demand answers from. What's the plan? She asked. We go in quiet. Confirm it's Derek. Get him out before anyone else shows up. Lorenzo checked his gun, the motion automatic and familiar. You stay in the SUV until I signal that it's clear. No. The word came out before Ava could stop it. Lorenzo turned to her. No? I need to see him. Need to look him in the eye and know that this is real, that he actually did all of this. Ava's hands clenched into fists. I need to stop being afraid of him. Lorenzo studied her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. All right, but you stay behind me. You don't speak unless I tell you to, and if things go wrong, you run. Agreed? Agreed. They approached the motel from the beach side, using the darkness and the sound of waves to cover their approach. Jin had disabled the exterior cameras, a quick call to the right person, and the security system went down for maintenance. Lorenzo picked the lock on the stairwell door and they climbed to the second floor in silence. Room 217 was at the end of the hall. Light leaked from under the door. Inside, Ava heard a television, some game show with artificial laughter and prizes nobody needed. Lorenzo pressed his ear to the door, listening. Then he stepped back and knocked. 3 sharp raps that sounded like authority. "Housekeeping," he called, his voice pitched different, accent thicker. Inside, the television muted. Footsteps approached the door. "I didn't order housekeeping," Derek's voice said, and Ava felt her whole body go rigid. That voice, the same voice that had whispered promises and lies, had said "I love you" while planning her destruction. "Complimentary service, sir. Won't take but a moment." A pause. Then the sound of a chain being undone, a deadbolt sliding back. The door opened 6 inches, and Derek's face appeared in the gap. Lorenzo hit the door with his shoulder, sending Derek stumbling backward. They were inside before Derek could scream, the door closing behind them with Lorenzo's gun pointed steady at Derek's chest. "Hello, Derek," Lorenzo said quietly. "We need to talk." Derek stumbled backward into the cheap motel room, his eyes going wide with recognition and terror. He looked worse than Ava remembered, thinner, with shadows under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and mounting desperation. His clothes were wrinkled, his hair unwashed, and there was a tremor in his hands that hadn't been there before. "Ava?" Her name came out as a strangled whisper. How did you—" "Sit down," Lorenzo said, his voice flat and cold. The gun never wavered from Derek's chest. "Hands where I can see them." Derek backed toward the bed, his hands rising slowly. He looked between Lorenzo and Ava, calculation flickering behind the fear in his eyes. Even now, even caught and cornered, he was looking for angles, for ways to talk himself out of this. "Look, I can explain," Derek started, his voice taking on that smooth, persuasive tone Ava had once found charming. "Whatever you've heard, it's not what it looks like. I was trying to protect—" "Stop talking." Lorenzo kicked the door closed behind them. "Jin, we're inside. Secure the perimeter." "Copy," came the voice through Lorenzo's earpiece. Ava stepped forward, her legs shaking but her voice steady. "You used me. Used my name, my credentials, my identity to guarantee a loan for $3 million. Derek's eyes darted to her, then away. "I was going to pay it back. I had a system, a sure thing. I just needed time. Time for what?" Ava's voice rose despite her efforts to control it. "Time to gamble away money you stole? Time to let me take the fall when it all collapsed? Time to disappear while men with guns hunted me through the city? I didn't know they'd come after you." Derek's composure cracked, desperation bleeding through. I hoped they'd just write it off, move on. I never wanted you to get hurt." Lorenzo laughed, and it was the coldest sound Ava had ever heard. "You hoped Victor Kozlov would write off $3 million. That's either impressive optimism or staggering stupidity." Derek's face went pale. "Victor sent you?" "Victor gave us 2 weeks to find you and recover his money. After that, Ava pays your debt through 5 years of service." Lorenzo moved closer, and Derek pressed himself against the wall. "So no, Derek, Victor didn't send us. He gave us incentive to hunt you down before his other collectors find you first." "I don't have the money." Derek's voice was barely audible. "I lost it. The system I had, it was supposed to work, but the odds turned and I kept doubling down trying to win it back, and it just kept going wrong." "Where?" Ava demanded. "Where did you lose $3 million? "Here. The casinos. I thought Atlantic City was far enough from New York. I could play without Victor's people watching. I could win it back and pay everyone and make this right." Derek laughed, a broken sound that might have been a sob. "But it's all gone. Every cent. I've got maybe 5,000 left, and half of that's on credit." Lorenzo holstered his gun with a smooth motion. 5,000 won't even cover the interest on what you owe." "I know. Don't you think I know that?" Derek's hands shook harder. "I'm dead. Whether Victor finds me or the others do, I'm a dead man walking. So go ahead, do whatever you came here to do. At least it'll be over." Ava stared at the man she'd planned to marry, the man she'd loved, trusted, built a future with. He looked pathetic now, broken and desperate, nothing like the confident charmer who'd swept her off her feet. And looking at him, she felt nothing but cold fury. "You were going to let me die for this," she said quietly. "You were going to let me pay for your addiction, your mistakes, your cowardice. And you don't even have the decency to apologize." "I'm sorry." Derek lurched forward, and Lorenzo's hand went to his gun. "Ava, I'm so sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen. I loved you, I swear I did. The gambling, it's like a sickness. I can't stop, even when I know I should. I kept thinking the next hand would save everything, and by the time I realized how deep I was, it was too late." "It was too late the moment you forged my signature." Ava's voice was steel. "It was too late when you stole my savings. It was too late when you walked away and left me to face the consequences of your choices." Lorenzo's phone buzzed. He checked it, his expression darkening. "We have company. Jin reports 2 vehicles approaching. Professional formation. We need to move. Now." "Who is it?" Derek's voice climbed toward panic. "Does it matter? They're not here to talk." Lorenzo grabbed Derek by the collar and hauled him to his feet. "Back exit. Move." They rushed toward the bathroom, where a window overlooked the alley behind the motel. Lorenzo forced it open, checked the drop. 8 feet to a dumpster, then clear ground to where Jin had positioned the sedan. "You first," Lorenzo said to Derek. "I can't. I'm afraid of heights." Lorenzo shoved him toward the window. "Jump or I throw you. Choose." Derek climbed through with shaking hands and dropped, landing badly on the dumpster with a metallic crash that echoed through the alley. Ava went next, and Lorenzo caught her at the window, his hand steadying her. "Trust me," he said quietly. Ava looked into his dark eyes and realized she did. Somewhere in the past 48 hours, this dangerous stranger had become the only solid thing in her collapsing world. She climbed through and dropped, landing better than Derek, but still feeling the impact jar through her knees. Lorenzo followed, landing beside her like a cat, barely making a sound. In the distance, Ava heard car doors slamming, voices shouting. The hunters had reached the motel. "This way!" Lorenzo pulled them toward the sedan where Jin was waiting, engine running. They piled in, Derek in the back with Ava, Lorenzo in front with Jin. The sedan peeled out of the alley just as men appeared at the motel's rear entrance, their weapons visible in the streetlights. "Did they see us?" Lorenzo asked. "Unclear, but they'll know we were there." Jin took a hard turn, merging into boardwalk traffic. "Where to?" "North. Back to New York. We need to figure out our next move." Derek was breathing hard in the back seat, his face pressed against the window. "They almost got me. They did get you," Lorenzo said without turning around. "You just happened to be in our custody instead of theirs. Don't mistake that for safety." "What are you going to do with me?" "That depends on how useful you can be." They drove for 20 minutes, taking a winding route through Atlantic City to make sure they weren't being followed. When Lorenzo was satisfied they were clear, Jin pulled into a rest stop off the highway. The parking lot was mostly empty, a few long-haul trucks, a couple of cars with exhausted families sleeping in the back seats. Lorenzo turned to face Derek. "You owe Victor $3 million you can't pay. But money isn't the only currency in our world. Information has value. Access has value. The question is whether you have anything valuable enough to buy your life back." Derek swallowed hard. "What kind of information?" "Who else did you borrow from? Who else has a claim on you?" "There were others. Smaller amounts, but..." Derek's voice caught. "There's a man named Dmitry Volkov. He works for the Bratva, runs protection rackets in Brighton Beach. I owed him $200,000. And Marcus Chen, he's connected to the triads, handles money laundering through a dozen restaurant fronts. I owed him $300,000. Lorenzo's expression turned dangerous. "You borrowed from the Bratva and the triads, used Victor's money to try to pay them off, and when that failed, you ran. You didn't just betray one organization, Derek. You created a web of broken obligations that spans 3 different crime families." "I was desperate. I thought if I could just win enough to pay everyone, it would all work out. It never works out. Gambling is a tax on hope, and you paid it until there was nothing left." Lorenzo pulled out his phone and started making calls again, this time speaking Cantonese, then Russian, piecing together the full scope of Derek's stupidity. Ava watched her ex-fiancé crumble in the seat beside her. He looked small now, diminished, nothing like the man who'd made her believe in forever. She wanted to feel satisfaction at his downfall, but all she felt was exhausted disgust. "I loved you," she said quietly. "Did that mean anything at all?" Derek turned to her, and for just a moment she saw something genuine in his eyes. "It did. I swear it did. But the gambling, it was like a drug. Nothing else mattered when I was at the table. Not you, not our future, not the promises I made. Just the next hand, the next bet, the next chance to win big. So I was just collateral damage in your addiction. I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I am. I'm so sorry, Ava." Lorenzo hung up and turned back to them. "Here's the situation. Victor wants his money, but he's a pragmatist. He knows Derek can't pay cash. But Derek's information, the details of where the money went, who else was involved, the scope of the gambling networks he accessed, that has value to Victor's competitors. If we can package it right, we might be able to trade information for debt forgiveness." "What about the others?" Derek asked. "Dimitri and Marcus, they'll still want what I owe them. One problem at a time. Victor's the biggest threat, so we solve that first." Lorenzo's eyes were cold and calculating. "But understand this, Derek. The moment you stop being useful, you stop being protected. You'll give us every detail of every transaction, every connection, every dirty secret you learned while playing in their world. And if I find out you're holding back, I'll deliver you to Victor personally." Derek nodded frantically. "I'll tell you everything. Names, dates, amounts, everything I know. You'll do more than tell. You'll testify, you'll wear a wire if needed. You'll become the kind of informant that makes prosecutors salivate and criminals wake up screaming." Lorenzo's smile was sharp. "Welcome to the only way out of the hole you dug, Derek, straight through the people who trusted you." The drive back to New York took 3 hours. Lorenzo spent most of it on the phone, negotiating, planning, building a strategy that would turn Derek's betrayal into leverage. Ava listened and learned more about the criminal ecosystem than she'd ever wanted to know. She learned that information really was currency in this world, that betraying one organization could buy favor with another, that the map of who owed what to whom was constantly shifting, alliances forming and breaking based on opportunity and necessity. And she learned that Lorenzo moved through it all like a grandmaster playing chess, seeing 10 moves ahead, anticipating responses before they happened. "You're good at this," she said during a quiet moment. "I've had practice. My family taught me young, survive by being useful, protect yourself by being necessary. In a world built on violence, the people who thrive are the ones who make themselves valuable enough that killing them costs more than keeping them alive." "Is that what you're doing with Derek? Making him valuable?" "I'm giving him a chance to be useful instead of dead. What he does with that chance is up to him." Lorenzo glanced back at Derek, who'd fallen into an exhausted sleep. "But I'm not doing it for him. I'm doing it for you, because you asked me to teach you how to survive, and lesson 1 is this. Sometimes survival means using the people who hurt you as tools to protect yourself." They arrived in Manhattan as dawn was breaking, the city waking up to another day of legitimate business, while the criminals who really ran things retreated to count their profits and plan their next moves. Lorenzo took them to a different safe house this time, a brownstone in the West Village that looked from the outside like any other expensive residence, but was fortified like a fortress on the inside. Derek was taken to a locked bedroom on the 3rd floor, with Marcus stationed outside to make sure he didn't try to run. Ava found herself in a study with Lorenzo, watching him work as he compiled Derek's information into something he could trade. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now I set up a meeting with Victor. I present Derek's information as a package deal, everything he knows about the Bratva's operations, the Triad's money laundering networks, the connections between different gambling organizations. In exchange, Victor forgives the debt and agrees to tell his competitors that Derek is under my protection." "Will it work?" "Maybe. Victor values information, and what Derek knows could give him leverage over his rivals. But there's a risk. If Victor decides the information isn't valuable enough, or if he thinks I'm trying to manipulate him, he could reject the deal and demand payment in blood. And if that happens," Lorenzo met her eyes, "then I fight. Because I told you I'd keep you safe, and I don't break my word." The simplicity of it took Ava's breath away. This man who dealt in violence and betrayal, who moved through a world of shadows and blood, was willing to go to war for her. Not because he loved her, they barely knew each other, but because he'd made a promise. Why? She asked. Why do all this for someone you just met? Lorenzo was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried weight of old grief. I told you I knew someone who needed help and didn't get it. Her name was May. She was my sister, younger by 3 years, smarter than me by miles. She fell in love with the wrong man, someone charming and persuasive, someone who made promises he never intended to keep. What happened? He was connected to a rival organization, used May to get information about my family's operations. By the time she realized what he was doing, it was too late. My parents tried to protect her, but they trusted the wrong person to negotiate the peace. Someone who smiled while planning their deaths. Lorenzo's hands clenched into fists. They were killed in their home. May survived, but the guilt destroyed her. She took her own life 6 months later. Ava felt tears sting her eyes. Lorenzo, I'm so sorry. Don't be. Be angry instead. Be determined. Because the world that killed my family, the world that broke my sister, it's the same world Derek pulled you into. And the only way to survive it is to become harder than it is, smarter, more ruthless. I don't know if I can be ruthless. You already are. You just don't know it yet. Lorenzo pulled up a chair across from her. You looked Derek in the eye and felt nothing. No love, no pity, just cold assessment of what he'd done and what he deserved. That's ruthlessness, Ava. That's the part of you that will keep you alive when kindness would get you killed. Before Ava could respond, Lorenzo's phone rang. He checked the screen, his expression sharpening. It's Victor. He wants to meet tonight. That's fast. He's curious. I told him I had information that could shift the balance of power in Brooklyn, and Victor's never been able to resist an advantage. Lorenzo stood and paced to the window. The meeting will be at his warehouse. Neutral ground, but his territory. We'll be walking into the lion's den. Should I come with you? You have to. Victor wants to see you. Make sure you're real and not just a story I'm selling. He'll want to look you in the eye and decide if you're worth the deal I'm proposing. Ava's stomach tightened. What should I do? Remember what I told you before. Show strength, not fear. Answer honestly. And let Victor see that you're not just Derek's victim. You're someone who learned from being betrayed and became dangerous because of it. They spent the rest of the day preparing. Lorenzo coached Ava on how to present herself, how to read Victor's tells, when to speak, and when to let silence do the work. He dressed her in clothes that were expensive but not flashy. A black suit that looked professional, heels that added height without sacrificing mobility. When she looked in the mirror, Ava barely recognized herself. The broken woman from Murphy's bar was gone. In her place stood someone harder, sharper, someone who looked like she belonged in Lorenzo's world of calculated dangers and necessary cruelties. As evening fell, they prepared to leave. Marcus would stay with Derek, making sure he didn't try to contact anyone or warn the people they were about to betray. Jin would drive, with a second team following at a distance in case things went wrong. Are you ready? Lorenzo asked. Ava checked her reflection one more time. No, but I don't think I ever will be. Good. Certainty makes you careless. A little fear keeps you sharp. They drove to Red Hook as darkness settled over the city. The warehouse looked different at night, more threatening, its red door like a warning painted in blood. Jin parked a block away, and they walked the final distance with Lorenzo's hand resting lightly on Ava's lower back, guiding and protective. The door opened before they reached it. Victor's men were waiting, 4 of them, all armed, all watching with the kind of attention that missed nothing. They were searched efficiently and thoroughly, Lorenzo's gun confiscated with professional courtesy. Victor is expecting you, one of the men said in accented English. This way. They were led through the casino floor past tables where games had stopped, players frozen mid-bet as they watched Lorenzo and Ava walk past. The private room Victor had used before was prepared, vodka on the table, chairs arranged for negotiation, soundproofing that would swallow screams. Victor was waiting, dressed in a suit that probably cost more than Ava's former yearly salary. Beside him stood 2 other men, one Asian, one who looked Middle Eastern, both carrying themselves with the same dangerous authority as Victor. Lorenzo, Miss Mitchell. Victor gestured to the chairs across from him. Allow me to introduce my associates. This is Dmitry Volkov, who represents certain Russian interests in Brighton Beach, and Marcus Chen, who handles financial matters for our friends in Chinatown. Ava's blood went cold. The other men Derek had borrowed from. Victor hadn't just accepted a meeting, he'd turned it into a tribunal. Lorenzo's expression didn't change, but Ava saw his jaw tighten fractionally. I wasn't aware this would be a group discussion. You offered information that affects all of us. It seemed appropriate to hear your proposal together. Victor poured vodka into 5 glasses. Please, sit. Let's discuss what you believe is worth $3 million. They sat. Lorenzo accepted the vodka but didn't drink, and Ava followed his lead. Across the table, 3 of the most dangerous men in New York watched them with expressions that promised nothing good. Derek Hayes borrowed from all of you, Lorenzo began. He used each debt to cover the others, creating a shell game that collapsed when his gambling addiction consumed everything. The result is that each of you has lost money and face with no clear path to recovery. We know this, Dmitry said, his accent thicker than Victor's. Tell us something we don't know. Derek kept records, detailed records of every transaction, every connection, every weak point in the gambling networks he accessed. He documented which casinos have soft security, which dealers can be bribed, which high rollers are vulnerable to pressure. He knows the infrastructure because he exploited it. Marcus Chen leaned forward. And you have these records? I have Derek, and Derek will provide everything he knows in exchange for forgiveness of his debts. Victor laughed. Forgiveness. That's a word I don't use often. Then think of it as an investment. Derek's information could give each of you leverage over your competitors. The Bratva could shut down Chechen gambling operations in South Brooklyn. The Triads could pressure Korean bookmakers in Flushing. And you, Victor, could expand into territory that's been closed to you for decades. Or, Dmitry said slowly, we could simply kill Derek, kill you, and torture Miss Mitchell until she tells us where the money is. Ava felt her breath catch, but Lorenzo's voice remained steady. You could try, but Ava doesn't know where the money is because there is no money. Derek gambled it all away, and killing me would start a war you're not prepared to fight. I have alliances you don't want to test. Everyone has alliances until they're dead, Marcus said. True, but I've made arrangements. If I don't walk out of this building in the next hour, information gets released that would be very uncomfortable for all of you. Details about your operations, your personal lives, your vulnerabilities. I'm not threatening you. I'm explaining the cost of violence. Victor studied Lorenzo for a long moment. You've become more cautious since the last time we spoke. I learned from people who paid for their trust with their lives. A wise lesson. Victor turned to Ava. What about you, Miss Mitchell? What do you want from all this? Ava met his pale blue eyes and remembered Lorenzo's coaching. Show strength. Show that you learned. I want to stop being a victim. I want the people hunting me to know that I'm not Derek's accomplice. I'm the person who helped bring him down, and I want to make sure no one ever uses me like this again. Revenge, then. Justice. There's a difference. Victor's smile was approving. Perhaps. Tell me, if we accept Lorenzo's deal, what happens to you? I rebuild. I start over. I become someone who can't be betrayed because I'm too aware, too careful, too strong. You would stay in this world? After what it's done to you? Ava thought about the question. The easy answer was no. Run far away, disappear into a normal life, pretend none of this ever happened. But standing there, looking at 3 men who dealt in violence and power, she realized the normal life was already gone. Derek had destroyed it, and maybe that wasn't entirely a loss. I would stay on the edges, she said carefully. Not deep enough to drown, but close enough to see the currents and avoid them. Lorenzo offered to teach me how to survive. I planned to learn. Victor looked at Dmitry and Marcus. Some silent communication passed between them, a language of nods and glances that Ava couldn't read. Finally, Victor turned back to Lorenzo. $1 million, he said. Derek's information must lead to opportunities worth at least $1 million for each of us. If it does, we forgive his debts and consider the matter settled. If it doesn't, Derek dies, and you owe us the difference. That's not the deal I'm offering, Lorenzo said. It's the only deal you're getting. The room went silent. Ava could hear her own heartbeat, could feel the weight of decision hanging in the air like smoke. Lorenzo's face was unreadable, but she saw his hands, relaxed, ready, the hands of someone prepared for violence if negotiation failed. 75,000 each, Lorenzo counteroffered. Enough to show good faith, small enough that Derek's information will exceed expectations. You get value beyond the debt forgiven, which incentivizes you to use the intelligence effectively. 250,000 each, Victor said. 100,000. Deal. Victor extended his hand across the table. Derek provides everything he knows. We verify the information's value. If it checks out, debts are forgiven and he lives under your protection. If he's lying or holding back, we take him apart piece by piece until we're satisfied. Lorenzo shook Victor's hand, then Dimitri's, then Marcus's. The ritual felt ancient, binding in ways that went beyond contracts and lawyers. I'll have Derek here tomorrow night, Lorenzo said. He'll give you everything. Names, numbers, strategies, weaknesses. Every card he's holding, you'll get to see. Good. Victor poured fresh vodka. Now drink with us. A deal without vodka is just words. This time they all drank. The vodka burned and Ava welcomed it. Heat and clarity and the sharp awareness that she'd just watched Lorenzo bet everything on Derek's information being valuable enough to satisfy 3 criminal organizations. As they prepared to leave, Victor pulled Ava aside. A word of advice, Miss Mitchell. Lorenzo is a good man to have protecting you, but don't mistake protection for safety. In our world, safety is an illusion. The moment you believe you're safe is the moment you're most vulnerable. I'll remember that. See that you do. And if you truly plan to survive on the edges of this world, learn to swim in deep water first. Otherwise, the currents will pull you under when you least expect it. Outside, the night air felt clean after the smoke and tension of the warehouse. Jin was waiting with the car, and they drove away from Red Hook in silence. It wasn't until they were back in Manhattan, blocks from the safe house, that Lorenzo finally spoke. You did well in there. Victor respected you. I was terrified. Fear and respect aren't mutually exclusive. Victor fears very little, but he respects people who face their fear and function anyway. Lorenzo looked at her in the dim light of the car. The deal is done. Tomorrow, Derek tells them everything. If his information is good, you're free. No more debts, no more hunts. And if it's not good enough, then we have bigger problems. But I don't think it will come to that. Derek's stupidity was comprehensive. He made enemies across enough organizations that his intelligence will have value to all of them. They reached the brownstone and Ava followed Lorenzo inside. The house felt different now, less like a fortress, more like the eye of a storm. Tomorrow, Derek would betray everyone he'd borrowed from, and the consequences would ripple through the criminal underworld like a stone thrown in dark water. Get some sleep, Lorenzo said. Tomorrow is going to be difficult. But Ava couldn't sleep. She lay in the expensive bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about Victor's words. Protection isn't safety. The moment you believe you're safe is the moment you're most vulnerable. Somewhere in the house, Derek was preparing to betray everyone who'd trusted him. And somewhere in the city, men were planning moves and countermoves in a game where lives were currency and loyalty was bought with blood. Ava had asked to learn how to survive in this world. Tomorrow, she would discover if survival was something that could be taught or something you either had inside you or didn't. And in the darkness, she felt something shift. The last remnants of the woman she'd been burning away, leaving behind someone harder, colder, more dangerous. Someone who might actually survive what was coming. Morning came with the weight of a guillotine blade, slow and inevitable. Ava woke to find Lorenzo already awake, sitting in the study with Derek, extracting every piece of information like a surgeon removing shrapnel. She watched from the doorway as Derek talked, his voice hoarse from hours of confession, mapping out the entire network of his stupidity with the desperate precision of a man trying to buy his life back one detail at a time. The Bratva moves money through a car wash in Brighton Beach, Derek was saying, his finger tracing routes on a map Lorenzo had spread across the desk. They use it to clean cash from protection rackets, prostitution, gun sales. Dimitri personally oversees collections every Thursday at 6 p.m. He's punctual, always alone except for one bodyguard, and he carries everything in a leather briefcase that never leaves his hand. Lorenzo made notes with mechanical efficiency. Security at the car wash. Cameras, but they're old. Analog system, easy to disable if you know what you're doing. And there's a back entrance through the adjacent laundromat that shares a basement. The owners are cousins, both paying protection to the Bratva. What else? Derek swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing like a stone in his throat. Marcus Chen launders triad money through 12 different restaurants in Chinatown and Flushing. But the hub is a place called Golden Palace on Mott Street. They run 2 sets of books, one for the IRS, one real. The real books are kept in a safe in the manager's office, 2nd floor, combination changed monthly, but always follows the same pattern. Last 6 digits of the restaurant's phone number, reversed. Ava stepped into the room, and both men looked up. Derek's eyes held a mixture of shame and desperation that might have moved her once. Now she felt nothing but cold assessment. "Is it enough?" she asked Lorenzo. "It's comprehensive. Whether it's valuable enough remains to be seen." Lorenzo closed his notebook and stood, rolling his shoulders like a fighter preparing for a bout. Victor and the others will verify everything Derek tells them. If even one detail is wrong, if this is misdirection or outdated intelligence, the deal collapses. "It's all true," Derek insisted. "I swear on everything. It's all current. I was in these places a month ago, using them, seeing how they operate. This is real intelligence." "It better be, because if it's not, you won't die quickly." Lorenzo checked his watch. "We meet them in 8 hours. Until then, Derek stays locked down. No phone calls, no messages, no communication with the outside world. Marcus, make sure he doesn't do anything stupid." Marcus nodded from his position by the door, his scarred face impassive. "He tries to run. I break his legs. He tries to call someone. I break his hands. He tries anything else. I get creative." Derek went pale but nodded. He understood the terms, understood that his only value now was information, and the moment that ran out, so did his protection. Lorenzo gestured for Ava to follow him out of the study. They walked to the kitchen, where Jin was making coffee with the same precision he brought to everything else. The morning light streaming through the windows felt surreal, too normal, too peaceful for what the day held. "Are you ready for tonight?" Lorenzo asked, accepting a cup from Jin. "I don't know what tonight looks like, so how can I be ready?" "Fair point." Lorenzo leaned against the counter, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked tired. Not physically exhausted, but weighted down by the complexity of keeping all the pieces moving in the right direction. "Tonight, we go back to Victor's warehouse. Derek will present everything he knows to Victor, Dmitri, and Marcus. They'll ask questions, verify details, probe for weaknesses. If they're satisfied, they forgive the debts, and we walk away clean. And if they're not satisfied, then things get complicated very quickly." Ava sipped her coffee, letting the bitter heat ground her. "You keep saying we, but this is my problem, Lorenzo. Derek was my fiancé, my mistake. You've already done more than anyone had a right to ask." Lorenzo's dark eyes studied her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I told you why I'm doing this. My sister died because no one fought for her when it mattered. I won't make that mistake twice. I'm not your sister." "No, you're stronger than she was." May was gentle, trusting, believed the best in people even when they showed her their worst. "You've been broken, and you're rebuilding yourself into something harder. That's rare, worth protecting." The compliment settled over Ava like armor she hadn't known she needed. "Teach me something." Lorenzo raised an eyebrow. "What?" "You said you'd teach me to survive. We have 8 hours before the meeting. Teach me something that matters." Lorenzo set down his coffee and considered her request. Then, slowly, he smiled. "All right, Jin, clear the training room. We're going to teach Miss Mitchell how to see the things most people miss." The training room was on the brownstone's 3rd floor, converted from what had probably once been servants' quarters. The space was sparse. Mats on the floor, weapons locked in a cabinet along one wall, mirrors covering another. It smelled like sweat and discipline. Lorenzo positioned Ava in the center of the room. Most people think survival is about fighting. It's not. It's about awareness. Seeing danger before it reaches you, recognizing threats before they materialize, reading a room faster than the room can read you. How do you teach that? By breaking down what you think you know and rebuilding it. Lorenzo walked a slow circle around her. Right now, someone is planning to kill you. Not metaphorically, literally. There's someone in this city who wants you dead or disappeared. Maybe it's someone we haven't identified yet. someone Derek borrowed from that we don't know about. Maybe it's someone from one of the organizations who thinks you're a loose end. The specifics don't matter. What matters is that you operate from the assumption that danger is always present. Ava felt her pulse quicken. That sounds exhausting. It is, but it's also survival. Now, close your eyes. She did. The room disappeared, leaving only darkness and the sound of Lorenzo's footsteps circling her. How many exits are in this room? He asked. Ava tried to remember. The door we came through, and there was a window, I think. 3. The door, the window, and a fire escape access hidden behind the mirror on the east wall. You missed one, which means in an emergency, you'd have fewer options than you need. Open your eyes. She opened them. Lorenzo pointed to the mirror, and now that she was looking, she could see the faint outline of a doorframe behind the glass. Details matter. Now, I'm going to bring in 3 people. You're going to observe them for 30 seconds, then tell me which one is the threat. Jen entered first, followed by Marcus, and then a woman Ava hadn't seen before. Young, Asian, beautiful in a way that seemed almost weaponized. They stood in a line, and Lorenzo started a timer on his phone. Ava studied them. Jin looked calm, relaxed, his hands loose at his sides. Marcus was Marcus. Solid, immovable, radiating controlled violence. But it was the woman who caught Ava's attention. Her hands were still, but her weight was forward on her toes, ready to move. Her eyes tracked everything with the systematic attention of someone cataloging targets. Time, Lorenzo said. Who's the threat? The woman. Why? Her stance. She looks relaxed, but she's ready to move. And her eyes. She's measuring distances, calculating angles. The woman smiled. Very good. Most people see a pretty face and assume softness. Ava, this is Yuki. She handles wet work for my organization. Lorenzo gestured to the woman. She's killed 17 people in the past 3 years, all of them men who underestimated her because she's beautiful. Yuki's smile widened. 18, but who's counting? Ava felt ice in her stomach. This delicate woman with the dancer's grace was a killer, and she stood there smiling like they were discussing the weather. The lesson, Lorenzo said, is that threats don't always look threatening. Sometimes they look beautiful, harmless, vulnerable. You have to learn to see past the surface to the intention underneath. They spent the next 6 hours drilling. Lorenzo taught Ava how to read body language, how to spot surveillance, how to identify exits in any room she entered. He showed her where people concealed weapons, ankle holsters, waistbands, inside jacket pockets, the small of the back. He taught her the tells that indicated someone was lying, micro-expressions that flashed across faces too quick for conscious recognition, but visible to a trained eye. Yuki demonstrated how to turn everyday objects into weapons. A pen became a stabbing implement. A scarf became a garrote. A cup of hot coffee became a blinding agent. Everything could be weaponized if you were desperate enough and creative enough. The goal, Lorenzo explained, isn't to make you a fighter. It's to make you aware enough that you never have to fight. You see danger coming, you avoid it. You recognize a trap, you don't walk into it. You identify a threat, you neutralize it before it becomes kinetic. By the time they finished, Ava's head was spinning with information. She felt like she'd taken a crash course in paranoia, but it was paranoia based on pattern recognition and tactical awareness rather than irrational fear. How do you live like this? She asked Lorenzo as they took a break, sitting on the mats with water bottles and the setting sun streaming through the windows. Always watching, always calculating, never truly relaxing? You get used to it, and eventually it becomes automatic. You don't think about checking exits any more than you think about breathing. Lorenzo's voice carried old weariness. But you're right, it's exhausting, which is why most people in this world don't last long. They burn out, make mistakes, get careless. The ones who survive are the ones who find ways to decompress without dropping their guard completely. How do you decompress? Lorenzo was quiet for a moment. I used to play piano. My mother taught me when I was young. There's something about music. It requires focus but allows emotion in ways that daily life doesn't. When I play, I can let my guard down just enough to remember I'm human. Can I hear you play sometime? Maybe. If we survive tonight. The words hung in the air like a promise and a threat. Ava looked at this man who'd pulled her out of Murphy's bar, who'd protected her and taught her and risked his own safety to keep her alive. And she realized that somewhere in the chaos of the past few days, he'd become more than just her protector. He'd become the only solid thing in a world that had revealed itself to be built on quicksand and lies. "Lorenzo," she said quietly, "if things go wrong tonight, they won't. But if they do—" He turned to face her fully, his dark eyes serious. "If things go wrong, you run. You take the escape route I'll show you, you use the contacts I'll give you, and you disappear. You rebuild somewhere else, under a different name, with the skills I've taught you. You survive, Ava. That's the only thing that matters. What about you? I've been surviving in this world for a long time. I'll handle whatever comes." "That's not an answer." Lorenzo's smile was sad. "It's the only answer I have." At 7 p.m., they prepared to leave for Red Hook. Derek had been coached within an inch of his life, drilled on every detail until he could recite his intelligence in his sleep. He looked pale and scared, but that was probably good. Victor would expect fear. Confidence would look like a con. Lorenzo dressed in his usual black suit, but this time Ava noticed the subtle modifications. Extra pockets for weapons, reinforced stitching along the shoulders that would hold up under stress, shoes that looked expensive but had rubber soles for quick movement. Everything was tactical, disguised as elegance. Ava wore the same black suit from the previous night, but Yuki had added something new, a bracelet that was actually a garrote wire, a necklace with a pendant that concealed a small blade, a ring with a stone that could be pressed to release a single-use sedative, tools disguised as jewelry, weapons hidden in plain sight. "If you need any of these," Yuki said as she fastened the necklace, "it means everything has gone wrong. But better to have them and not need them than need them and not have them." They drove to Red Hook in 2 vehicles, Lorenzo, Ava, and Derek in the SUV with Jen at the wheel, Marcus and 2 other men Ava didn't recognize following in the sedan. The sun had set, leaving the city wrapped in that particular darkness that comes just before the streetlights fully take over. Victor's warehouse looked different at night, more forbidding, its red door like a wound in the brick. Men stood outside now, armed and visible, a statement of power that didn't need to hide. Jen parked where they had before, and they walked the final distance under the watchful eyes of Victor's security. Inside, the casino floor was empty. The tables stood abandoned, cards scattered across felt like dead leaves. Victor had cleared the building for this meeting, a sign of respect or preparation for violence, Ava couldn't tell which. They were led to a larger room this time, one that looked like it had been a manager's office back when the warehouse actually shipped goods instead of facilitating crimes. Victor sat behind a massive desk with Dmitri on his right and Marcus Chen on his left. Behind them stood men whose faces Ava didn't recognize but whose postures screamed danger. "Lorenzo, Miss Mitchell, Derek." Victor's voice was cordial, almost friendly. "Please sit. We have much to discuss." There were 3 chairs arranged in front of the desk. Lorenzo took the center seat, with Ava on his right and Derek on his left. The positioning was deliberate. Lorenzo as the leader, Ava as the interested party, Derek as the product being sold. "Derek," Victor said, leaning forward, "you claim to have information worth $1 million to each of us. Convince us." Derek swallowed hard, his hands shaking until he clasped them together to hide the tremor. "I've spent the last 8 months gambling in your establishments, all of you. I've seen how you operate, where your weaknesses are, who can be bribed and who can't. I've mapped your networks because I needed to understand them to exploit them." "Exploitation we know about," Dmitri said, his Russian accent thick with contempt. "Tell us something we don't." Derek pulled out a folder, documents Lorenzo had helped him prepare, photographs and spreadsheets and diagrams that laid out 8 months of criminal intelligence. The Bratva's car wash in Brighton Beach processes approximately $200,000 in dirty money every week. But you're losing 15% to skimming by the manager, a man named Alexei Volkov. He's your cousin, Dmitri, which is why you haven't noticed. But he's stealing from you using a second set of books that he keeps at his apartment on Ocean Avenue. Dmitri's face went dark. "You're lying." "I'm not. I used Alexei to launder some of the money I stole. He took a 20% cut and told me it was standard. I got curious, did some digging, and found out he only reports 5% to you. The other 15 goes into accounts in Cyprus that he thinks are untraceable. Prove it. Derek pulled out bank statements, photographs of Alexei meeting with offshore bankers, records of transactions that should have been reported but weren't. The evidence was comprehensive, damning, the kind of betrayal that in Victor's world demanded blood. Dmitri looked at the documents for a long moment, then nodded slowly. This information has value. Derek turned to Marcus Chen. The Golden Palace launders your money, but you're not the only organization using it. The manager, a man named Wei Lin, has been selling access to your cleaning operation to Korean bookmakers and Japanese yakuza. He's charging them premium rates and keeping the profit. Your books show $3 million annually in cleaning fees. The real number is closer to $6 million. Wei is pocketing the difference. Marcus's expression didn't change, but Ava saw his hands tighten on the armrests of his chair. Continue. For the next hour, Derek laid out betrayals and weaknesses, security flaws, and vulnerable points. He gave them the kind of intelligence that could reshape the criminal landscape of New York. The knowledge of where their own people were stealing from them, where their rivals were vulnerable, where opportunities existed to expand and consolidate power. Victor, Dmitri, and Marcus asked questions, probed for weaknesses in Derek's information, tested his knowledge against their own intelligence. But every answer Derek gave held up under scrutiny. Every detail checked out. Every betrayal he exposed was confirmed by evidence they could verify. Finally, Victor leaned back in his chair. This is good intelligence. Better than I expected. He looked at Dmitri and Marcus. Thoughts? The information about Alexei alone is worth what Derek owes me, Dmitri said. The rest is bonus. Marcus nodded. Wei's betrayal will be dealt with, painfully. And the intelligence about the Yakuza access gives us leverage we didn't have before. I'm satisfied. Victor turned to Lorenzo. It seems your gambit paid off. Derek's information is valuable enough to forgive his debts. Relief flooded through Ava so intensely she felt dizzy. It was over. The hunt, the fear, the constant threat of violence, all of it was ending. Derek would live, his debts forgiven, and she would be free to rebuild her life without the weight of his mistakes crushing her. But Lorenzo didn't relax. Ava saw his shoulders stay tight, his eyes tracking something she couldn't see. Then we have a deal. We do, Victor said. With one modification. The room went cold. Ava felt every muscle in her body tense. What modification? Lorenzo asked, his voice carefully neutral. Derek's debts are forgiven, but Derek himself remains an asset too valuable to release. Victor's smile was predatory. He's demonstrated knowledge and access to criminal networks across 3 organizations. That kind of intelligence-gathering ability is rare. I want him working for me. That wasn't the deal, Lorenzo said. The deal was debt forgiveness in exchange for information. I'm forgiving the debt. Derek is free of financial obligation, but I'm offering him employment. Lucrative employment, with benefits that include continued breathing. Victor's eyes were hard. He can accept, or he can refuse and take his chances with the people who are still hunting him. His choice. Derek looked like he was going to be sick. What would I be doing? Intelligence gathering. You'd move through the gambling world, the financial world, gathering information about my competitors and my associates. You'd report to me personally, and in exchange, you'd be protected, compensated, and alive. Victor leaned forward. It's a generous offer, Derek. I suggest you take it. Lorenzo's hand moved to Ava's knee under the table, squeezing once. A warning to stay quiet, to let this play out. She forced herself to breathe evenly while her mind raced through the implications. Derek was trapped. Victor was offering him a choice that wasn't really a choice at all. Work for him or die. And if Derek accepted, he'd be permanently bound to the criminal world, a tool to be used and discarded when his usefulness expired. I accept, Derek said quietly. I'll work for you. Excellent. Victor stood, and everyone else rose with him. Then we're done here. Derek stays with me. Lorenzo, Miss Mitchell, you're free to go. Thank you for bringing this opportunity to my attention. Derek comes with us tonight, Lorenzo said. We'll deliver him to you tomorrow, after he's had time to settle his affairs. No. The word was final. He stays now. I don't give people time to run, Lorenzo. You should know that. The temperature in the room dropped. Ava saw Lorenzo's jaw tighten, saw the calculation in his eyes as he weighed options. They were surrounded by Victor's men, outgunned and outmaneuvered. Fighting would be suicide. But then Derek spoke. It's okay, Lorenzo. This is fair. I created this mess. I'll pay for it. He turned to Ava, and she saw real remorse in his eyes for the first time. I'm sorry, Ava, for everything. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I am. You deserved better than me. Yes, Ava said quietly. I did. Lorenzo held Victor's gaze for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. Take care of him, Victor. He's more useful alive than dead. I'm well aware. And Lorenzo? Victor's smile was knowing. You've developed a soft spot for Miss Mitchell. It's visible in how you protect her, how you negotiate on her behalf. Be careful. In our world, soft spots are where the knives go in. They left the warehouse with Derek still inside, trapped by a choice that wasn't a choice, bound to Victor's service for however long he remained useful. Outside, the night air tasted like salt and car exhaust, and the bitter flavor of incomplete victory. He'll be okay, Lorenzo said as they walked to the SUV. Victor values intelligence assets. He'll keep Derek alive as long as Derek keeps producing valuable information. That's not the same as being okay. No, but it's survival, which is more than Derek deserved. They drove back to Manhattan in silence. Ava felt the weight of the past few days settling over her like lead. Derek was alive, but enslaved. She was free, but changed. And Lorenzo had fought for her, protected her, and in doing so had revealed something in himself that he usually kept hidden. When they reached the brownstone, Lorenzo dismissed Jin and Marcus, sending them away with instructions to stand down from high alert. For the first time since Ava had met him, they were alone in the safe house. What happens now? She asked. Lorenzo poured 2 glasses of whiskey from a bottle that probably cost more than her old monthly salary. He handed one to Ava and gestured to the study. Now you decide who you want to become. They sat in chairs facing each other, the whiskey warm and smooth. The room quiet except for the distant sounds of the city outside. Lorenzo looked tired, truly tired, in a way that went beyond the physical. You're free, he said. Victor accepted the deal. No one is hunting you anymore. You can go back to your old life, or what's left of it. Find a new job, a new apartment, rebuild the normal life Derek destroyed. Or you stay. You continue learning what I've been teaching you. You develop skills that make you valuable in ways that don't require you to be a victim waiting for rescue. Lorenzo's dark eyes were serious. The world you've seen this week doesn't disappear just because you close your eyes to it. It's always there, running parallel to the legitimate world, touching it in 1,000 invisible ways. You can pretend it doesn't exist, or you can learn to navigate it well enough that it can't hurt you. Ava thought about the woman she'd been a week ago. Broken, desperate, drowning in a dive bar while her life burned down around her. That woman was dead. She'd died somewhere between Murphy's bar and Victor's warehouse, burned away by fear and survival, and the cold clarity that came from seeing the world as it really was. What would staying look like? You'd work for me. Not in the criminal enterprise. I don't need another enforcer or intelligence gatherer. But I have legitimate businesses that need managing. Import-export companies, real estate holdings, investment portfolios. They're clean, legal, profitable. But they benefit from someone who understands both worlds, who can see the currents underneath the surface. You're offering me a job. I'm offering you a future where you're never vulnerable again, where you have the skills to protect yourself and the resources to rebuild on your own terms. Lorenzo set down his glass. But I'm also offering you a choice, stay or go. Build something new or reclaim something old. Either way, you'll be okay, Ava. You're stronger than you think. Ava stood and walked to the window. Manhattan spread out before her, millions of lives being lived in millions of apartments, most of them blissfully unaware of the shadows that moved beneath the surface of their daily existence. She could rejoin that world, find another accounting job, another cheap apartment, another normal boyfriend who might or might not destroy her life. Or she could stay in the liminal space Lorenzo occupied, not fully criminal, not fully legitimate, but somewhere in between where the rules were different and survival required different skills. "I'll stay," she said, turning back to him. "Teach me everything." Lorenzo smiled, and it was the first genuinely warm smile she'd seen from him. "Then tomorrow, your real education begins. Tonight, you should rest. You've earned it." But before Ava could move toward the door, the window behind her exploded inward in a shower of glass and gunfire. She felt Lorenzo hit her from the side, driving her to the floor as bullets chewed through the study, tearing apart furniture and books and the illusion of safety. Through the chaos, Ava heard Lorenzo shouting into his phone, calling for backup, for Jin and Marcus, for anyone who could reach them before whoever was attacking finished the job. She tasted blood, her own or Lorenzo's, she couldn't tell, and felt the brutal weight of a lesson she should have learned earlier. Victor had been right. The moment you believe you're safe is the moment you're most vulnerable. And someone had been waiting for exactly that moment to strike. The gunfire stopped as suddenly as it started, leaving only the ringing silence of violence and the acrid smell of cordite hanging in the air. Lorenzo rolled off Ava, his hand pressed against his shoulder where blood was seeping through his shirt in dark pulses. "Stay down," he hissed, reaching for the gun he kept in a hidden compartment beneath the desk. His movements were slower than usual, pain making him careful where he was usually fluid. Ava's ears were ringing, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. Broken glass covered the floor like scattered diamonds, each piece catching the light from the street below. Through the shattered window, she could see the building across the street, a perfect sniper position with clear line of sight into the study. "You're hit," she said, her voice sounding distant and strange through the ringing in her ears. "I'm functional. That's what matters." Lorenzo checked his gun, his jaw tight with pain. "They used the meeting with Victor as a distraction, waited until we were alone and dropped our guard." "Who? Who's doing this?" Before Lorenzo could answer, footsteps pounded up the stairs. He swung his gun toward the door, but it was Jin who burst through, weapon drawn, his usually calm face tight with fury. Two shooters across the street, third floor. Marcus is engaging from the rear position. Jin crossed to Lorenzo, saw the blood, and his expression went even harder. "How bad?" "Through and through, missed the bone." Lorenzo stood, swaying slightly, but refusing to show weakness. "Did you see who they are?" "Professional contractors. Not Victor's people, not Bratva, not Triad." Jin moved to the window, careful to stay out of the sight line. "Which means someone else wants you dead and waited for the perfect moment." Ava's mind raced through the past week, through all the enemies Lorenzo had made protecting her. Derek, someone who didn't want him talking. Lorenzo's eyes sharpened despite the pain. Derek knows things that go beyond Victor's operations. If there's someone else he borrowed from, someone we didn't know about. His phone rang. Lorenzo checked the screen with his good hand, and his expression went cold. "It's a block number," he answered on speaker. "This is Key." "Lorenzo." The voice was smooth, cultured, with an accent Ava couldn't place. "I hope I haven't inconvenienced you too badly. The shooting was meant to be fatal, but I understand my people missed. They won't miss again." "Who is this?" "Someone Derek borrowed from, someone he promised things to, someone who doesn't appreciate being cut out of your deal with Victor, Dmitri, and Marcus." The voice carried amusement, like this was all a game. "My name is Konstantin Volkov, and I believe you have something that belongs to me." Lorenzo's jaw tightened. "Volkov, I should have known." Jin's expression went grim. He pulled out his phone and started typing rapidly, pulling up information even as the conversation continued. "You've heard of me then. Good. That saves time on introductions." Konstantin's voice was pleasant, conversational. "Derek Hayes borrowed $2 million from me 18 months ago, used it to gamble, lost it all, then borrowed from others to try to pay me back. A very foolish strategy, but gamblers are rarely wise." "And you want your money." "I want more than money, Lorenzo. I want Derek. He has information about certain operations in Eastern Europe that I cannot allow Victor or the others to access. Information that could destabilize arrangements that took me years to build." Ava felt ice flood through her veins. "Derek's already with Victor. You're too late." "Miss Mitchell, the woman who started all this by being too trusting." Konstantin's laugh was soft. No, I'm not too late. Victor has Derek in his warehouse, yes, but I have something Victor values more. Something that will ensure he trades Derek back to me within the hour. What could you possibly have that Victor values more than intelligence on his competitors? His daughter, 16 years old, on her way home from ballet practice in Brighton Beach. She's in the back of one of my vehicles right now, quite safe as long as Victor cooperates. Once I have Derek, she'll be released unharmed. Everyone gets what they want. Lorenzo's face went white, then flushed with rage. You touched Victor's daughter. You've started a war you can't win. I've created an incentive structure that ensures compliance. There's a difference. Constantine's tone remained pleasant. Now I'm calling you because you have influence with Victor. You arranged the meeting, you brought Derek to him. Call Victor. Tell him to make the trade. Derek for his daughter. Simple, clean, everyone survives. And if I refuse? Then Victor's daughter dies. Victor declares war on me and anyone he thinks helped me, and you find yourself caught between multiple organizations all looking for someone to blame. Plus, of course, my people will keep trying to kill you. Eventually, they'll succeed. Lorenzo looked at Jin, who held up his phone showing information he'd pulled up. Konstantin Volkov, former KGB, current arms dealer and information broker, known for elaborate schemes and a complete absence of conscience, the kind of man who would absolutely kidnap a 16-year-old girl to force a trade. I need time, Lorenzo said. You have 30 minutes. After that, I start sending Victor pieces of his daughter until he gives me what I want. Konstantin hung up. The silence in the destroyed study was absolute. Ava felt like she couldn't breathe. This had spiraled so far beyond Derek's gambling debts into something monstrous. We have to call Victor, she said. We can't let him hurt that girl. Victor already knows. Lorenzo grimaced as he pressed a hand to his wounded shoulder. Konstantin would have called him first, established the stakes. Were the backup plan, the additional pressure. Jin was already moving, checking weapons, preparing for violence. What's the play? Lorenzo's eyes went distant, calculating. Konstantin expects Victor to trade Derek for his daughter. That's the obvious move. But Victor's not just a father. He's a crime boss. He can't show weakness by caving to extortion, even to save his child. It would destroy his reputation, invite every other organization to use his family as leverage. So what does he do? Ava asked. He calls in every favor he has and goes to war. Which means this brownstone is about to become ground zero for a conflict between multiple criminal organizations. Lorenzo looked at Jin. Get Marcus. Secure the perimeter. Anyone who isn't ours gets put down hard. What about me? Ava asked. Lorenzo turned to her, and she saw something in his eyes she'd never seen before. Genuine fear, not for himself, but for her. You run. Right now. There's a safe route through the basement. A car waiting 2 blocks away with clean documents and enough cash to disappear. You go to the address I'm about to give you, you wait for this to blow over, and you rebuild somewhere far from New York. No. Ava, this isn't negotiable. You taught me to survive. You taught me to see threats and face them instead of running. And you're bleeding from protecting me. Ava stood, glass crunching under her feet, and she felt something crystallize inside her, the final transformation from victim to survivor. I'm not running. Not from this. Not from you. Lorenzo stared at her, and for a moment she saw him truly vulnerable. I can't protect you if this goes wrong. Then teach me to protect myself. Before Lorenzo could argue, his phone rang again. This time it was Victor. Lorenzo! Victor's voice was ice and fury. I assume you've heard from Konstantin. I have. What are you going to do? What I always do. I'm going to kill everyone responsible and burn their world to ash. Victor's breathing was controlled, but Ava could hear the rage underneath. But first, I'm going to get my daughter back, and I need your help. Name it. Konstantin has her in a warehouse in Red Hook, half a mile from my own location. He's daring me to come for her, knowing I'll bring every gun I have. It's a trap, obviously. He'll have superior numbers and defensive positions. So you need a diversion. No, I need someone Konstantin doesn't expect. Someone who can get inside while his attention is on me. Victor's voice turned sharp. You and Miss Mitchell. You're not on Konstantin's radar as primary threats. You can approach from an angle he won't be watching. Ava felt her stomach drop. Victor was asking them to infiltrate an armed position to rescue his daughter while he created a distraction by attacking from the front. It was insane, suicidal, exactly the kind of desperate gambit that got people killed. "We'll do it," Lorenzo said. "Lorenzo," Ava started. He held up a hand, silencing her. "Victor, we'll need 20 minutes to prepare. Can you hold until then?" "I can give you 15. After that, I'm coming regardless of whether you're in position. My daughter doesn't spend one more minute in Konstantin's hands than necessary." "Understood. Send me the coordinates." Victor hung up. Lorenzo turned to Jin. "Get Yuki. Tell her to bring everything she has for close quarters combat and hostage rescue. We're going into hell, and I want the devil on our side." Jin nodded and disappeared. Lorenzo moved to the weapons cabinet, pulling out guns and equipment with mechanical efficiency despite his injured shoulder. Ava watched him work and felt fear and determination warring in her chest. "I don't know how to fight," she said quietly. "You don't need to fight. You need to move quiet, follow instructions, and be ready to carry a 16-year-old girl who's probably terrified out of her mind." Lorenzo handed her a small pistol. "This is a Glock 19, 15 rounds, easy to use, reliable. You only use it if everything else has failed and death is the alternative. Understand?" Ava took the gun. It was heavier than she expected, solid and real, in a way that made this all brutally concrete. "I understand." Yuki arrived within 5 minutes, carrying a duffel bag that clinked with the sound of serious hardware. She assessed Lorenzo's wound with a professional eye and immediately set to work bandaging it properly, quick, efficient movements that had him field-ready in under 2 minutes. "You're insane for doing this," Yuki said, but there was approval in her voice. "I like it." They geared up quickly. Lorenzo gave Ava a vest, lightweight body armor that would stop most handgun rounds but wouldn't save her from anything heavier. Yuki provided an earpiece and a throat mic, linking them all on a secure channel. "The warehouse Konstantin's using is an old shipping facility," Lorenzo explained, pulling up blueprints on his phone that Jin had somehow acquired in the past 10 minutes. 3 stories, lots of cover, multiple exits. He'll have the girl on the top floor with his best people. Victor will hit from the main entrance, drawing most of Konstantin's forces. We go in through the loading docks on the east side, move up through the building, extract the girl, and get out before anyone realizes we're there. "Simple," Yuki said with dark humor. "What could go wrong?" They drove to Red Hook in the sedan, Jin at the wheel with Marcus riding shotgun. The city passed by outside the windows. Normal people living normal lives, completely unaware that violence was about to erupt just blocks from their homes. Ava checked the Glock compulsively, making sure the safety was on, that she remembered how to release it, that her hands wouldn't shake when it mattered. Lorenzo's hand covered hers, steadying the nervous movement. "Breathe. Fear is useful. Panic gets you killed." "I'm not panicking. Not yet. But you will be tempted to when the shooting starts. When that happens, you focus on one thing, getting that girl out. Everything else is just noise." They parked 3 blocks from the target. In the distance, Ava could see the warehouse, a hulking structure of brick and rusted metal. Lights were on in the upper floors, and she could make out shadows moving behind windows. Konstantin's people, waiting for Victor's assault. Lorenzo's earpiece crackled. "Victor, in position. Assault begins in 5 minutes. Are you ready?" "Moving now," Lorenzo responded. He looked at Ava, Jin, Yuki, and Marcus. "Quiet, fast, lethal. We ghost through this building and take that girl home to her father. Questions?" There were none. They moved through the darkness like shadows, approaching the warehouse from the east where the loading docks sat empty and dark. Yuki picked the lock in seconds, and they slipped inside to a space that smelled like old oil and decay. The interior was a maze of crates and shipping containers, creating natural corridors and choke points. Jin led with Lorenzo close behind, both moving with the practiced silence of people who'd done this 1,000 times. Ava followed, trying to remember Yuki's training from earlier. Heel to toe, minimal noise, eyes always moving. They reached the stairs just as the sound of gunfire erupted from the front of the building. Victor had begun his assault. The noise was deafening even through the thick walls. Automatic weapons, explosions, the chaos of professional violence. Go, Lorenzo said, and they rushed up the stairs while Constantine's people scrambled toward the main entrance to repel Victor's attack. The second floor was deserted, all hands pulled to defend against the frontal assault. They moved through it like ghosts, encountering no resistance. But the third floor would be different. That's where Constantine would keep his highest value asset, protected by his best people who wouldn't abandon their posts even under attack. At the top of the stairs, Lorenzo held up a fist. They stopped. Ava could hear voices ahead, Russian, arguing about whether to move the girl or hold position. Lorenzo made hand signals to Jin and Marcus, and they moved forward with perfect coordination. The hallway beyond was lit by bare bulbs, harsh and revealing. 4 men stood guard outside a door at the far end, all armed, all alert despite the battle raging below. These were professionals who understood their job was to protect the girl, not chase glory-fighting Victor's forces. Lorenzo looked at Yuki and nodded. She moved like water, flowing down the hallway with impossible speed and silence. The first guard didn't even see her coming, just felt the wire loop around his neck, and his consciousness fade as she choked him unconscious. The second guard turned, raising his weapon, but Jin was already there with a suppressed pistol that coughed twice, putting the man down with brutal efficiency. The third and fourth guards had time to shout, to raise their weapons, to fire shots that went wild as Lorenzo and Marcus returned fire with the precise accuracy of people who'd survived more gunfights than Ava could imagine. The guards dropped, and suddenly the hallway was quiet except for Ava's hammering heart. "Clear," Lorenzo said into his mic, moving to extract. He kicked open the door to reveal a sparse room with a single chair in the center. Victor's daughter sat bound to it, a thin girl with dark hair and her father's pale blue eyes, tears streaming down her face, but her expression defiant. When she saw them, hope and fear warred on her features. "We're here to take you home," Lorenzo said in Russian, his voice gentle in a way Ava had never heard before. "Your father sent us." Yuki was already cutting the girl's bonds with a knife that appeared from nowhere. The moment she was free, the girl lunged forward and Ava caught her, holding her while she sobbed against her shoulder. "It's okay," Ava murmured. "You're safe now. We've got you." "Not safe yet," Jin said from the doorway. "We've got company, multiple targets closing fast." They'd been spotted. Constantine's people were coming, and they were trapped 3 floors up with limited exits and a terrified teenager who'd just been through hell. Lorenzo's jaw set in that way Ava recognized, the way that meant he was about to do something dangerous. "Jin, Marcus, Yuki, get the girl out. East exit, back to the vehicles. Ava goes with you." "What about you?" Ava demanded. "I'm going to make sure Constantine doesn't follow." Lorenzo checked his weapon, his wounded shoulder forgotten in the surge of combat focus. "And I'm going to have a conversation with a man who thought kidnapping children was acceptable strategy." "Lorenzo, you can't!" He grabbed her face with both hands, his dark eyes burning into hers. "I told you I'd protect you. I told you I'd keep you safe. This is how I do that. You take Victor's daughter, and you run, and you let me handle what comes next." "No, I'm not leaving you." "Ava," I said no. She pulled the Glock from her waistband, checked it the way he'd taught her, and met his eyes with steel she didn't know she possessed. "You taught me to survive. That means surviving together or not at all." For a heartbeat, Lorenzo just stared at her. Then, slowly, he smiled. A real smile, warm and genuine and proud. "You're insane. I learned from the best." Jin grabbed Victor's daughter. "We don't have time for this. If you're both staying, we need a defensive position. The office at the end of the hall has reinforced walls and one entrance. We can hold it until Victor's people break through." They moved fast, piling into the office and barricading the door with a heavy desk. Through the thin walls, Ava could hear footsteps approaching, lots of them, converging on their position with lethal intent. Lorenzo positioned himself at the door with Jin and Marcus, weapons trained on the entrance. Yuki stayed back with Victor's daughter, ready to protect her if anyone broke through, and Ava stood beside Lorenzo, the Glock heavy in her hands, her entire body vibrating with adrenaline and terror and a strange, fierce joy. This was it, the final lesson. Survive or die, fight or fall, but face it standing instead of running. The footsteps stopped outside the door. Then a voice called out, Constantine himself, speaking in accented English. Lorenzo Key, you've made this very difficult. All I wanted was Derek. Instead, you forced me to kill Victor's daughter, which will start a war that benefits no one. Then let her go, Lorenzo called back. Take Derek if you want him that badly, but the girl leaves unharmed. I'm afraid it's too late for that. You've seen my face, my location, my methods. The girl has too. You all have to die now. It's just business. Business. Lorenzo's laugh was cold. You kidnapped a child. That's not business, Constantine. That's the act of a desperate man who's run out of options. Perhaps, but I'm a desperate man with 20 armed professionals between you and freedom. How long can you hold that office? How many rounds do you have? How long before Victor's daughter dies from a stray bullet because you chose heroics over sense? Ava felt Victor's daughter trembling beside her. The girl was trying to be brave, trying to hold it together, but she was 16 and terrified, and this was so far beyond what any child should have to endure. Victor's going to kill you for this, Ava found herself saying, her voice carrying through the thin walls. Even if you win here, even if you kill all of us, he's going to hunt you to the ends of the earth. You kidnapped his daughter. There's no walking away from that. Constantine laughed. Viktor Kozlov is a businessman. He understands that sometimes assets are lost in conflict. He'll mourn, certainly, but he'll also recognize that pursuing vengeance against me would be costly and unprofitable. We'll negotiate. I'll pay reparations. Life will continue. You don't know Victor, Lorenzo said quietly. I've seen him destroy entire organizations for lesser insults. You touched his daughter. You're already dead. You just don't know it yet. Then I'll take you with me. The assault came hard and fast, gunfire tearing through the door, wood splintering, bullets chewing through the desk they'd used as a barricade. Lorenzo and Jin and Marcus returned fire with controlled precision, each shot placed with deadly accuracy. Men screamed outside as the bullets found their marks. But Constantine had numbers. For every man who fell, 2 more took his place. They were being overwhelmed through sheer volume of fire. The office walls turning to Swiss cheese as bullets punched through from multiple angles. Ava fired her Glock at a shadow in the doorway, saw the man fall, and felt something inside her break and reform harder. She was fighting, actually fighting, defending herself and the people she'd chosen to stand with, and the terror she'd expected never came. There was only clarity, focus, the brutal simplicity of survival. Then Victor's voice boomed through the building, amplified somehow, carrying the weight of absolute fury. Konstantin Volkov, I am coming for you. The gunfire hesitated. Through the walls, Ava heard shouting, confusion, the sound of Victor's forces breaking through Konstantin's defenses like a tidal wave. The assault on their position faltered as men were pulled away to defend against the new threat. He broke through, Jin said, reloading his weapon with quick, efficient movements. Victor's in the building. What followed was carnage. Ava heard it rather than saw it. The systematic destruction of Constantine's forces as Victor tore through the warehouse with the fury of a father whose child had been threatened. The screaming, the gunfire, the sounds of violence so intense it seemed to shake the building's foundations. And then, suddenly, silence. Heavy footsteps approached their office. The door, what was left of it, swung open to reveal Victor covered in blood that wasn't his own, his pale blue eyes blazing with rage that hadn't yet burned out. "Papa," his daughter sobbed, and Victor's expression shattered. He crossed the room in 3 strides and gathered his daughter into his arms, holding her like she was made of glass and miracles. "Moja dochka, my daughter. You're safe now. You're safe." Over Victor's shoulder, his daughter met Ava's eyes and mouthed 2 words. "Thank you." Victor looked up at Lorenzo. "Constantine? Escaped through the west exit when you breached. He's running. Not for long." Victor stood, keeping his daughter close. "I will find him. And when I do, I will spend days teaching him what happens when someone threatens my family." He looked at each of them. Lorenzo, Ava, Jin, Marcus, Yuki. "You saved her. You risked everything to save my daughter. I will not forget this debt." "No debt," Lorenzo said. "We did what was right. In my world, doing what's right is rare enough to be precious." Victor pulled out his phone and made a call in rapid Russian. When he hung up, he turned back to them. I'm sending you coordinates to a safe location. Go there, rest, recover, and when this is over, when Constantine's blood is paid for his crimes, we will discuss the future. They left the warehouse as Victor's people secured the scene, stepping over bodies and through smoke into the cold night air. Ava felt like she was floating, adrenaline and shock creating a strange dissociation from reality. She'd just survived a gunfight. She'd shot someone. She'd stood beside Lorenzo while death reached for them and refused to run. In the car, Lorenzo's wound had started bleeding again, soaking through Yuki's bandage. Ava pressed her hand against it without thinking, applying pressure the way she'd seen in movies, and he caught her wrist gently. I'm okay, he said. You're bleeding. I've bled before. I'll bleed again. But his hand stayed on her wrist, warm and grounding. You fought well in there, better than most professionals I've worked with. I was terrified. Terror and courage aren't opposites. Courage is being terrified and fighting anyway. Lorenzo's eyes were soft despite the pain. You've completed your education, Ava. You survived the worst this world could throw at you. The question now is what you do with that survival. They drove to the safe location Victor had provided, a penthouse in Midtown that made Lorenzo's brownstone look modest. Medical supplies were waiting, along with food, clean clothes, and rooms for each of them. Yuki properly treated Lorenzo's wound this time, stitching it closed with the practiced hands of someone who'd done field medicine countless times. Ava showered, watching blood, hers, Lorenzo's, maybe someone else's, swirl down the drain. She dressed in clean clothes and found Lorenzo on the balcony, looking out over the city as dawn broke across Manhattan. Is it over? She asked. Victor will find Constantine within 48 hours. When he does, the message will be clear. Family is off limits. Children are sacred. Some lines you don't cross even in our world. Lorenzo was quiet for a moment. Derek's probably dead already. Victor would have killed him the moment he learned about Constantine's involvement. Can't risk Derek having information Constantine might use. Ava should have felt something about Derek's death. Grief, anger, satisfaction, something. But all she felt was tired acceptance. Derek had made his choices. He'd gambled his life away one bad decision at a time, and eventually, the house always won. What happens to me now? Lorenzo turned to face her, and in the morning light, he looked younger, less burdened. That depends on what you want. The job offer still stands. Work for me, learn the business, build something new from the ashes of your old life. Or take the money I'll give you and disappear. Start fresh somewhere far from all this. What do you want? Ava asked. The question seemed to surprise him. What I want isn't relevant. It is to me. Lorenzo studied her face like he was seeing her for the first time. I want you to stay, but I won't ask you to. This world, Ava, it takes and takes and takes until there's nothing left. I've lost everyone I've ever cared about to it. I won't do that to you. What if I choose to stay anyway? Then I'll teach you everything I know. How to build legitimate wealth from criminal connections. How to move between worlds without being swallowed by either. How to be someone who can't be used or broken or destroyed by the next Derek who comes along. Lorenzo's voice was rough. And I'll protect you. Not because you need it, but because I want to. Because somewhere in the past week, you stopped being a responsibility and became someone He stopped, the words catching like they cost too much to say. Someone you what? Ava prompted gently. Someone I can't imagine my life without. The confession hung in the air between them, raw, honest, terrifying in its vulnerability. Ava stepped closer, close enough to see the exhaustion in Lorenzo's eyes, the pain he carried from wounds older than the bullet in his shoulder. I was drowning in that bar, she said quietly. Everything I thought I knew was gone. Everyone I thought I could trust had betrayed me, and I was ready to let it all just end. Then you walked in. You didn't save me, Lorenzo. You gave me the tools to save myself. And then you stood beside me while I learned how to use them. Ava, I'm not finished. She took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. I don't know what happens next. I don't know if I can really survive in your world, or if this is just adrenaline and trauma bonding. But I know I want to try. With you. Building something that's ours, not stained by Derek's mistakes or my old life's failures. Lorenzo's thumb traced circles on her palm. It won't be easy. Nothing worth having ever is. You'll see things that will haunt you. Do things that will change who you are. I already have. And I'm still standing. He pulled her close then, wrapping his arms around her despite the pain in his shoulder, and Ava felt something settle inside her, the bone-deep certainty that this was where she was supposed to be. Not because it was safe or comfortable or what she'd planned, but because it was real and hard, and hers. We'll start small, Lorenzo said against her hair. Legitimate businesses, clean operations. You'll learn the infrastructure, meet the contacts, understand how everything connects. And if you decide it's too much, if you want out, I'll make sure you have everything you need to disappear completely. And if I don't want out, then we build something together, something my sister would have been proud of. Something that uses the power and connections of this world to do actual good instead of just extracting profit. Ava pulled back enough to see his face. What did you have in mind? Over the next hour, as Manhattan woke up around them, Lorenzo outlined his vision, a foundation that helped victims of gambling addiction get treatment instead of ending up in debt to criminals. Legitimate businesses that employed people trying to escape the underworld. Safe houses for women fleeing abusive situations like the one that had destroyed his sister. Use the devil's money to do heaven's work, Lorenzo said with a slight smile. That's what my mother used to say. She ran charities her whole life funded by my father's less-than-legal operations. I think she'd like knowing I'm trying to honor that legacy. I'd like to help, Ava said. I know what it's like to be vulnerable, to need help and not know where to find it. Maybe we can make sure fewer people feel that way. They spent the next 3 days in the penthouse, while Victor's war with Constantine played out across the city. Lorenzo's network kept them updated, Constantine's operations being systematically dismantled, his people turning on him to save themselves, the noose tightening with brutal efficiency. On the 4th day, Victor called. It's done. Constantine won't trouble anyone again. Lorenzo didn't ask for details. Some questions were better left unasked. What about Derek? Ava asked when Lorenzo hung up. Victor confirmed it. Derek died the night Constantine kidnapped his daughter. Quick, painless, more mercy than he probably deserved. Lorenzo looked at her carefully. How do you feel? Ava examined her emotions like artifacts in a museum, distant, interesting, but no longer capable of hurting her. I feel nothing. He was part of my old life. That person he betrayed doesn't exist anymore. Good. Indifference is healthier than hatred. Hatred keeps you tied to the past. 2 weeks later, they returned to the brownstone. It had been repaired, the shattered windows replaced, the bullet holes patched, all evidence of violence erased like it had never happened. But Ava could still see it, could still feel the weight of that night when death had come calling and she'd chosen to fight instead of run. Lorenzo started teaching her the business, not the criminal operations. He was slowly extracting himself from those, fulfilling old obligations but taking no new ones. Instead, he showed her the legitimate empire he'd been building for years. Import companies that actually imported legal goods. Real estate holdings that provided affordable housing instead of money laundering. Investment portfolios that funded startups and small businesses instead of criminal enterprises. This is what I want to leave behind, he explained as they toured a property he was converting into transitional housing for women escaping domestic violence. Not fear or violence or the weight of crimes that can never be forgiven, but something that actually helps people, that makes the world marginally less terrible. Ava learned quickly. She had a mind for numbers and patterns, skills that had been wasted reconciling expense reports, but flourished when applied to building sustainable businesses. Within a month, she was managing 3 of Lorenzo's companies, making decisions that affected real lives in real ways. And slowly, carefully, they built something between them that wasn't based on protection or obligation. It was partnership, genuine and equal, 2 people who'd found each other in the worst moment and chosen to make something better from the wreckage. Victor kept his word about the debt. He provided introductions that opened doors, solved problems that would have taken Ava years to navigate, and made it clear to anyone who asked that she was under his protection. His daughter Irina visited sometimes, a bright, fierce girl who'd survived her ordeal with remarkable resilience and now wanted to study criminal psychology so she could help other trauma survivors. You saved my life, Irina told Ava one afternoon over tea. I want to use it for something that matters. You already are, Ava assured her. Just by surviving, by refusing to let what happened break you. That matters more than you know. 6 months after the night everything changed, Lorenzo took Ava to a house on the coast of Maine. It was modest compared to the Manhattan properties, a weathered cottage on a rocky shore where the Atlantic crashed against stone with eternal patience. I bought this years ago, Lorenzo explained as they walked the beach. Thought I might retire here someday, if I lived long enough. Somewhere far from the city, from the violence, from everything I'd built and done. A place to just be. It's beautiful. It's peaceful, which is rarer than beauty. He stopped walking, turning to face her with the ocean wind whipping his dark hair. I want to give you a choice, Ava. A real choice, not one made under pressure or fear. What choice? Stay in New York, keep building the businesses, maintain the connections to that world, or come here, with me. Leave it all behind and build something completely different. A quiet life, a normal life, the kind of boring existence we both thought we wanted before we learned what we were actually capable of. Ava looked at the cottage, then back at Manhattan's direction, invisible beyond the horizon. 6 months ago, she would have grabbed this offer with both hands, a chance to escape, to pretend the past weeks had never happened, to rebuild some facsimile of her old life. But she wasn't that person anymore. That person had died in Murphy's bar, or maybe in Victor's warehouse, or maybe in 1,000 small moments when she'd chosen to become something harder and stronger and more real. I don't want normal, she said. I want meaningful. I want to use what we've built to actually change things, to make sure fewer people end up desperate and broken like I was. We can do that from New York. We can't do it hiding in Maine. Lorenzo smiled like she'd given him a gift. I was hoping you'd say that. But Ava added, we should keep this place. Come here sometimes when the city gets too heavy, when we need to remember what we're fighting for. A compromise. I can live with that. They spent a week at the cottage learning how to exist without the constant pressure of threats and obligations. Lorenzo taught Ava to cook. Real cooking, not the microwave dinners of her old life. She taught him to laugh, to relax, to exist in moments without calculating 3 moves ahead. And one night, sitting on the porch while stars scattered across the sky and patterned city lights usually hid, Lorenzo pulled out a small box. This isn't what you think, he said quickly. I'm not proposing. We've known each other 6 months, most of it spent in crisis. That would be insane. Good to know, Ava said, amused. But this belonged to my sister, May. He opened the box to reveal a ring, simple silver with a small stone that caught the starlight. She gave it to me before she died, made me promise that if I ever found someone who made me want to be better than I was, I'd give them this. As a reminder that even people like us, people who've done dark things, seen darker things, were still capable of choosing light. Ava took the ring, feeling the weight of grief and hope it carried. Lorenzo, I can't. It's not an engagement, it's a promise that we'll keep choosing each other, keep building something that matters, keep fighting for the people who can't fight for themselves. His dark eyes were steady. And maybe someday, when we've earned it, when we've proven we can make something good from all this darkness, maybe then it becomes something more. Ava slipped the ring onto her right hand. It fit perfectly, like it had been waiting for her. I can make that promise. They returned to New York with renewed purpose. The foundation Lorenzo had envisioned became real, funded by the profits from legitimate businesses, staffed by people who understood addiction and violence because they'd survived it themselves. They opened the first safe house in Brooklyn, the first treatment center in Queens, the first job training program in the Bronx. Victor contributed resources and connections, using his network to refer people who needed help instead of people who needed to disappear. Dimitri and Marcus did the same, seeing the value in having options beyond violence for the desperate people who stumbled into their world. And slowly, painfully, the criminal ecosystem they operated in began to shift, not transform. Ava wasn't naive enough to think they could eliminate crime or violence, but they could create alternatives, offer exits, make sure that people like Derek had somewhere to go besides deeper into debt and desperation. A year after the night in Murphy's bar, Ava stood in the office of their newest venture, a program that helped former criminals build legitimate businesses instead of returning to the only life they knew. Lorenzo was beside her, reviewing applications from people who wanted a second chance. "This one," he said, pointing to a file. "Former enforcer for the triads, got out after his daughter was born, been clean for 6 months, wants to open a restaurant. Can we trust him? Can we trust anyone? But his references check out and Victor vouches for his sincerity." Lorenzo looked at her. "What do you think?" Ava read the application. A man named Chen Wei, who'd spent 15 years in the life before becoming a father, shocked him into wanting something different. His business plan was solid, his commitment seemed genuine, and everyone deserved a chance to rebuild. "We fund him, but we monitor closely, make sure he's actually building something legitimate and not just using us as cover for the triads." Agreed. Lorenzo made a note and moved to the next file. This was their life now. Not perfect, not safe, but purposeful in ways Ava's old existence had never been. She made real decisions that affected real lives. She used skills she'd learned in darkness to create light, and she did it all beside someone who'd seen her at her worst and chose to help her become her best. That evening, they had dinner with Victor and Irina at a restaurant in Little Italy. Victor looked older, the violence of the past year having carved new lines in his face, but he smiled when he saw them, genuine warmth breaking through his usual control. "Lorenzo, Ava, you look well." "So do you," Lorenzo said. "How's retirement treating you?" Victor had stepped back from active leadership of his organization, handing control to trusted lieutenants, while he focused on legitimate businesses and spending time with his daughter. The kidnapping had changed him, made him realize that some things were more important than power. "Retirement is boring," Victor admitted. "But boring is good. Boring means Irina is safe. My enemies are too afraid to move against me, and I can sleep without one eye open." He raised his glass. "To boring lives and the extraordinary people who earn them." They drank to that, and Ava felt something settle in her chest. Contentment, maybe? Or just the absence of the constant fear that had defined her early life. She'd been broken, betrayed, hunted, and nearly killed. And somehow, impossibly, she'd come through it stronger. As they left the restaurant, Lorenzo pulled her close. "Happy?" Ava considered the question. Happy wasn't quite right. Happiness was too simple, too shallow for what she felt. But she was content, purposeful, engaged in work that mattered with a partner who understood both her strength and her vulnerability. "Getting there," she said. "Ask me again in another year." "I will, and the year after that. And the year after that." Lorenzo's smile was soft. "I plan on asking for a very long time, Ava Mitchell." "Good, because I plan on being around to answer." They walked through the city they'd claimed as their own, not the glittering Manhattan of tourists and dreams, but the real New York underneath, where broken people fought to survive and sometimes found unexpected salvation. Ava had come here as a victim, desperate and drowning. She was leaving as a survivor who'd learned to swim in deep water. And somewhere in Murphy's bar, maybe, a woman sat at the bar drowning her sorrows, making the same mistakes Ava had made. But now there were safe houses to go to, hotlines PTO call, resources available for people who'd been betrayed and destroyed by the people they loved. Not everyone would use them. Not everyone could be saved. But some would. Some desperate soul would find the number, make the call, walk through the door into a second chance they'd never known existed. And that, Ava thought as Lorenzo's hand found hers in the darkness, was worth every moment of fear and pain and transformation. Because survival wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning of something real and hard and worth fighting for. The beginning of a life she'd built herself, from the ashes of everything she'd lost. The beginning of choosing light, even in the darkest places. And as Manhattan's lights blazed around them like 1,000 promises and warnings, Ava Mitchell walked forward into her new life. Not perfect, not safe, but entirely, beautifully hers.